What's up guys, Chaos Shinobi here. This is What If Naruto Has a Beast Bloodline. Summary: Naruto is adopted into the Aburame clan, but not just that, gains the bloodlines of several others. Watch as he becomes powerful enough to protect those who he loves and destroy those that try to harm them. Chapter 1, Aburame Naruto. It had been a calm night, no clouds covering the moon with its bright light shining over Konoha. However, that was not to last, as the Great Nine Tails raged at the gates as ninjas fought against it hopelessly. Minato knew that no attack would be able to stop it and had come down to the conclusion of dealing it. The problem with this was that there was no seal complex or strong enough to hold it, and so had been forced to create one from scratch. He looked up at his friend and could see the sadness even from the usually stoic man. "Shibi, you know this has to be done, there is no other way." He saw the man simply nod at him. "Good, and make sure it is all done to plan. I won't have my child being an outcast because of that damn council." He cursed. Those old fools had tried to make him take several wives to spread his bloodline, but he had told them to piss off. He grinned at the memory of their shocked faces and wished he would be able to see them when they found out he had a son. Oh, the joy, and if his son was anything like him they would not forget it ever. He looked at the picture of his wife on the desk. She had already left to go into hiding and would not be back until he was 16 or a Chunin. God, how he would miss her. "Yondaime-sama, it is time," he heard the man said slowly. "Of course, and call me Minato. Remember, I'm not above my friends in any way. You do always say that, and I always remind you are the Hokage and I am a clan head. You are above me." "Yeah, and I still don't have a comeback either," he said with a grin. "Well, I suppose this is goodbye, old friend." They hugged and Minato left the office quickly. Shibi stood watching the doorway. "Goodbye, Minato." 1 hour later, and Shibi stood in front of the council with the boy in his arms, who was sleeping peacefully even amongst the shouts of anger, cursing and vengeance. "The demon must be killed before it heals, otherwise it will kill us all," screamed a certain pink-haired woman. Many civilians agreed with her and one or two shinobi, but the rest were looking at the boy with some curiosity, or in Danzo's case greed. He could be a brilliant weapon, he thought. "Silence, I will not have that in my presence, especially over the child," roared Shibi, extremely pissed off at the council as his bugs rose to surround him and buzz angrily. That was more than enough to get everyone's attention. He rarely spoke, let alone shout. The buzzing quietened, but they remained in the air as a defense should anyone attempt anything. They had already done so that night, and they were not lucky people. As far as he was aware, they were still being treated for chakra exhaustion and one had died from it. "Do you know who this child is? Whose legacy he is, or how powerful he could become?" "He is right. If he was to be placed en route he would be unstoppable," said Danzo, with many civilians agreeing. The buzzing was heard again and the smirk fell from their faces as the whole wall behind Shibi was filled by bugs and they crawled along the floor and ceiling around him. "No, do you think I would let you take away my best friend's child to become an emotionless killing machine?" Many people in the room all gasped. It was no secret as to who this man's friend was. "How can it be? Yondaime had no wife or child?" asked the same woman. "Woman, you do not know anything. With the pressure of the council on him for heirs, do you think he would tell us of either? If he did, they would be bred from the minute they were old enough, and the power-hungry clans would try to abduct them and mix their bloodlines to become stronger," spoke an all very attentive Shikaku as he looked at the woman with mild disgust in his eyes. "Their resemblance is uncanny. The only people with blonde hair and blue eyes are Inochi's clan, and I'm not aware of any more children from his wife, so it must be true, and my support goes behind the Aburame clan." The man winked at Shibi. "I take it he made you adopt the boy?" Shibi nodded, and there were more outcries. "I have warned you already, council. I will not take this abuse towards me or the boy," he said as the bugs began to advance. Many became silent except for the woman who was known as Harunomiya. "You would not attack this council if you wish to remain on it and your clan be welcome in Konoha anymore," she said with a smirk. "But should my clan choose to leave and move to another village, that would be quite disastrous for you, would it not? Your economy would fall as my clan provides most of the silk for exporting, and you would lose most of your trackers and favor in the village for forcing us to leave over such a small threat." All this was said with a cold manner, but he was grinning under the collar of his coat. The look of shock on her face was quite pleasing to him as she tried to speak. "But you wouldn't, I mean." "Woman, you have said quite enough. I suggest you just keep quiet," said Kuza, glaring at her. "Shibi, you also have the support of the Akimichi clan." "The same as the Yamanka clan," spoke Inochi. "The Inuzuka clan stands with the Aburame," spoke Tsume. "I support the Aburames." "The Uchiha clan joins you," spoke the female head of the Uchiha, making everyone turn to her. She was usually cold and strict, but they saw a small smile on her face as she looked at the boy. "What is the meaning of this? It is a demon. It should be trained under me to destroy other villages in seconds," Danzo cried out at them. He was met with cold glares which he returned in anger. "Very well, it must be done to protect Konoha. Root, kill the boy, he said, and throughout the room Anbu appeared and restrained the ninja who tried to stop them in their mission as Seven advanced on Shibi, who brought his bugs forward to defend him and Naruto. However, before anyone could move, Naruto woke up and seeing all these people with masks started crying, and to their shock even more bugs started rising through the floor and blacked out the windows, which was when everything was kicked off as screams were heard in the dark and crashed as bodies and people moved around hitting the floors. When he stopped crying, the windows were uncovered and the bugs retreated back from where they came, revealing all the Anbu on the ground as well as Danzo. Everyone turned to the now giggling boy as he pulled on the collar of Shibi's jacket, trying to pull it down as the man stopped him. "That was interesting. I assume you have already transferred your bloodline to him?" asked Shikaku. "Of course, it was to guarantee his survival, as he is now under my protection and has our bloodline, and with your support I believe you would like to do the same?" Shikaku nodded, as did the other who were supporting him. "Then let us head to the sealing room I prepared in case of this series of events." They left, leaving the rest of the room in complete silence as they contemplated how strong the child would become under the clan heads. Naruto's years of training began almost the minute he could walk. Most of it to begin with was with the Aburames, learning to control and talk to his hive and other bugs, and would then travel to Shikaku and learn all the strategies and play shogi to increase his intelligence. When he was 6, he began working with the Uchihas on his bloodline and learn their taijutsu and incorporate it with his hive and form a powerful style, and at the same time he worked at the Inuzuka's bloodline, steadily improving his tracking skills. His bloodlines were the Destruction Bug Host technique, the Sharingan, improved senses from the Inuzuka, and his control over shadows. He had unlocked all of them very early, and the last one he achieved was his Sharingan, which had emerged in a battle with his father, Shibi. In practice with his bugs, a small party had been arranged to celebrate his final unlocked bloodline at a very young age of 8. He was entered in the academy the next year at the age of 9 and was instantly top of his class, far above the likes of such prodigies like Hyuga Neji and the previous year's Uchiha Itachi. His appearance was striking. The long standard trench coat of the Aburames, which would not tend to wear too often as it obstructed his movement, the usual sunglasses to cover his eyes because of the standard but compound eyes, a result from the bugs inhabiting his body. But what was most strange about them was that they had a deep ring of black around the iris, which was a sign of a powerful shadow user according to Shikaku when he inspected them, and at 14 years old he was surprisingly tall at 5 feet 10 inches, far taller than his classmates. Rock Lee the closest at 5 feet 8 inches. His coat was a deep black with 2 red stripes running the length of either side of it, and black combat boots, all of which contrasted with his blonde hair that had black streaks through it. Even if he was a year younger than his teammates, that didn't mean he was any weaker than them. He was easily the strongest, with Neji second, then Lee and Tenten last, simply because he was able to negate her weapons easily with his bugs and dodge them if need be. His sensei was a little weird, he had to admit, but was a great role model for Lee, who followed after him in his style of clothes and choice of taijutsu and training. The training was harsh for all of them, although to a lesser extent for Naruto due to his extreme healing and sheer stamina and chakra from the Kyuubi. Yes, he knew. The Aburames didn't believe in such secrets being held from someone, and he was told on his 10th birthday by all the clans looking after him. Surprisingly, it didn't really bother him. He was doing the village a great service. Why should he feel angry? So far it had only helped him get stronger. Today was another one of his team training days, and he stood in the middle of his 3 teammates waiting for their first move. This was typical practice. They would team up against him and try to take him down with their own styles and teamwork as he defended and struck back. He stood still with his jacket off, his body tensed, prepared for the first strike, and with a grin he dispersed into bugs which spread out towards Lee, who jumped away but was caught in the back by the real Naruto and taken to the ground. But when Tenten tried to help him by throwing kunai, he once again turned into bugs and she was frozen by his shadow bind as his bugs covered her and absorbed enough of her chakra to put her out of the match but still be conscious. He was struck in the back by a palm thrust from Neji, who charged him with his own bloodline, the Byakugan active. This caught the real Naruto, who collapsed onto a knee as Neji kicked at him, but Naruto narrowly dodged him, rolling to the side. Looking up at Neji, he gave a grin which was returned, and as he charged to knock out Naruto, he found himself unable to move. The Naruto in front of him became bugs and traveled along the ground to the left and traveled up Naruto's leg and back into his body. "I forfeit. Good match, Naruto." He was released. "You weren't so bad yourself, Neji. You almost had me when you attacked me from behind, and can I just say ow," he said as he clutched his side in pain with a small grin on his face. However, as much a joke as it was, the minute Tenten heard it. She was by his side trying to help him. "God, Tenten, it was a joke, I swear," he hissed in pain as he tried to stand up fully. And I'm the Hokage, now let me check it, Naruto-kun." He gave a sigh as he pulled his shirt up high enough for her to take a look at his side. She had a small blush as she ran her hands over the spot. "It's already healing. You should be all right in a few minutes, but don't strain yourself, okay?" she said with a small glare at him, knowing how he could be sometimes when it came to training. "Aw, but you know today's my training with Hana-chan," he whined. "Well then you can just blame Neji for that." Neji stepped back as he felt Naruto give him a glare but was relieved when he looked back at Tenten. He lowered his glasses slightly so she could see his eyes, making her blush as she looked into them. "But Ten-chan, do you really want me not to train? I suppose that means I can't take you on a date anytime soon." "I guess it can wait a few months or so." He was grasped by the collar of his shirt and pulled so his face was an inch away from her blushing one. Forget I said anything." She suddenly kissed him on the lips and he could hear silence from all of them and then snickering from Neji and cheering from Lee about the flames of youth. When he was released from her grip she then fell unconscious on top of him. Naruto walked down to the Inuzuka training grounds with a grin on his face which was spotted by Hana as he walked up to her. "Why are you so happy?" she asked curiously. "I had an encounter with Tenten earlier," he said still grinning. Hana's face saddened slightly. "Oh, is that so? Well, it doesn't matter, I'll make sure I wipe that grin off your face." A smirk came across her face as he smirked back. "I'll make you eat those words, Hana-chan." He fell into his stance as did Hana. "Will you now? How about we make this more interesting with a bet then? If you win I'll teach you a new jutsu, but if I win you take me on a date." She saw him freeze up slightly. Maybe she'd been too forward? But she saw the smirk reappear. "You got a deal." He launched himself at her as his bugs trailed behind him like a cape, and when she blocked him they flew forwards trying to surround her. But she immediately used Gatsuga and escaped from the blanket of insects and also knocked Naruto away into a tree. Landing, she saw him pull himself out of the tree and was tempted to see if he was okay but restrained herself as he cracked his neck. "Good shot. Now it's my turn." A long shadow shot from him and headed for her from the left, making her jump backwards into a large collection of bugs that tried to entrap her, but she turned into a log much to his dismay. He was caught completely unaware as her partner, Kitamura, struck him in the side, knocking him to the ground and biting into his arm. Naruto growled as he puffed into a log and appeared in a tree nearby holding his bloody arm. He growled again and was kicked out of the tree by Hana back into the field. He turned to her and saw him take his glasses off to look at her with blood-red Sharingan eyes. He slid them into his pocket as he charged her, intent on taking her out quickly, and as she tried to block his leg came up and swept her legs out from under her body, making her fall to the ground. She heard him laugh as his Sharingan gained another Tomoe in each eye, making them almost complete. She saw the maniacal grin on his face with red chakra surrounding him. Then he clutched his head in pain with his working arm and he screamed as his eyes turned back to normal and his bugs came out and latched to his skin. She could hear the gentle buzzing from them as the screaming stopped and he fell over, not moving. "Naruto!" she cried out as she moved quickly over to him. He was still breathing and was breathing heavily. She suddenly felt people behind her as she turned to see 3 people and a large wolf looking at her and him. "Who are you? What do you want?" she said, holding him closer to her. They all smiled. "I suggest you calm, child. Naruto is in no danger. He simply lost some control over his host, that is all. It has all been corrected by us," the oldest man said to her. "But who are you? How do you know about the Kyuubi?" "My dear, the Kyuubi is well known in this hateful village," cursed a younger man with a Sharingan active. "As for us, I suppose you could call us his bloodlines, which would be the most appropriate assumption for you, understand," spoke another man who looked middle-aged. "I suppose you can assume which bloodline we are." She nodded slightly. "You are his hive, I believe, and you are his shadow bloodline judging by your eyes, and you must be the Inuzuka because you're a wolf, which leaves you as the Sharingan because you are an Uchiha. But how can you have this form? It isn't possible." They all laughed. "Well, here we are proving that is a load of balls," grinned the old man who was his shadow abilities, who was hit by the Uchiha. "Don't use such language in the presence of a lady, you old fool." "Excuse me, but what are you doing here?" she asked, unconsciously stroking Naruto's hair with her hand. "We needed to inform you that he will not be feeling well over the next week, as we are going to fight the Kyuubi within him and hopefully destroy it, which should release it into hell where the beast came from. Although there are several consequences, but he will not die from it. We plan to strip its power and give it to him and accelerate his bloodlines above its normal capacities. It will be needed if what we believe to happen comes after him. This will technically make him the new 9-tailed beast, but we are not sure. The battle of chakra will be a great strain on his body and he will need to be monitored constantly should he go into shock from overloads. After all, we can't allow him to die," said the middle-aged man who was his hive. "I suggest you go straight to the Hokage and friendly clan heads as well, the Hyugas. They shall be able to observe and stop his pathways from overloading. After, if we are successful, we shall re-emerge and talk to him as well as anyone else. We shall begin in the next 2 days at noon. You would do best to prepare quickly." And with all that, they disappeared all at once and his bugs crawled back into his body. She quickly picked him up and ran off to her mother and hopefully gather the needed people. He had been unconscious for those 2 days and was watched over by a very reluctant Hiashi and several doctors when it all began. A sudden jerk of his body and the tensing of his muscles showed it all to them. Immediately the Hyuga clan had activated his bloodline, allowing him to observe the boy's chakra. It has begun, but what amazes me is that there are 5 sources of chakra attacking the larger, which I assume to the QB. His hands immediately shot out to the boy's shoulders as his body gave a violent jerk. It is fighting back aggressively, but it's being held back. He placed his hands in certain places across Naruto's body, releasing chakra into him. "What are you doing, Hiyashi-sama?" exclaimed one of the younger doctors, fearing he was trying to kill the boy. "I'm blocking that chakra from accessing the rest of his body, that way it's only in one place for them to fight and it won't be as damaging to his body. Now be quiet, I have to concentrate." And with that he fell silent as the others watched him work, and for the next few hours that was what they did until Hiyashi stumbled slightly, causing them to help him into a seat. "I've made blockades throughout his body which will hopefully trap it in his stomach. All we can truly do now is wait. Oh, and tell Hokage-sama that we're even," and he fell unconscious. And for the next 3 days Naruto remained unconscious, sometimes moving as a large wave of chakra passed through him. Luckily the barriers placed by Hiyashi were holding, meaning all they had to do was make sure his body got the nutrients it needed and occasionally check on him. Early in the morning of the 4th day there was a large wave of energy that passed through Konoha Hospital, causing many of the doctors to head for Naruto's room and find his body reacting violently and jerking around in the bed as red chakra started to encompass him. Many doctors were instantly beside him, slowing it down by repelling it with their chakra, making the boy glow with both green and red chakra as they raged and battled against each other. Another blast came from him and forced its way up his body to his waist, but then receded as the medics applied more of the healing chakra. Shibi and several others of his clan and associates came running into the room to see all these people nearing chakra exhaustion, where they instantly unleashed their bugs upon him to try and aid them in stopping the red chakra. For the most part it worked until they took in too much and had to return to their hosts. When this happened their hosts would buckle over from the toxic chakra but recover quickly as the bugs expelled it. Shibi was the one who stopped it all, as he called every Kikai bug he could sense in the immediate area, making the whole of the east side of the hospital turn black with moving insects as they scaled the wall to enter the room. These bugs drained every bit of the chakra that was visible and kept going until he stopped struggling and his own bugs came out and cocooned him protectively. They buzzed, causing all other bugs to leave and return where they came from. When they saw what the boy looked like, many men stood speechless as the woman blushed and stared at him. He looked like he was about 20, roughly 6 feet 4 inches tall, and his hair was much longer and was complete black with blood-red streaks through it. His body had completely changed. He wasn't what you would call weak before, but now, his muscles were huge, bulging from his arms, chest and legs nicely, and to mention something else that was bulging, his boxers were several sizes too small for him, which had all the woman faint with nosebleeds. The men who recovered first quickly checked him and found his health fine, no chakra burns or overloads, not even chakra exhaustion. And in essence he was simply asleep. Shibi leaned against the door frame looking at him sleeping, then gave a loud sigh. He was going to hate this, he could just feel it, and his bugs agreed, surprising him greatly, shivering with slight fear, and when asked they completely ignored him. Never in his life had his hives ignored him so openly. His eyes widened behind his glasses as he headed straight for his side and pulled back the blanket to look at his stomach. "The seal," he said quietly, "it's gone, except for this one." He pointed out a small seal above his belly button to them. At this point the women recover and fainted again at seeing his undersized boxers again. The bug user growled, "Can we get them out of here?" Team Guy were getting worried about their teammate and friend. He hadn't been to training in nearly a week, and when they asked Guy or any other Jounin, they were brushed off saying he was fine. Tenten had taken it the worse and was almost reduced to tears in training as her aim started to fail for the first time in years. Even Lee the ever-cheerful was acting differently. His training was falling as well as his passion for it, and Neji was becoming slightly colder towards all those who believed themselves better than him and had openly shouted at Hiyashi when he said he didn't know where Naruto was. All in all, the team was falling apart, and it pained Guy deeply to see it and not be able to do anything, but he had been ordered not to tell them anything, only that he was fine. Then the day came where Neji actually struck out at him with Lee and Tenten trying to force him to tell them where Naruto was. Guy wished he didn't have to, but he had to knock out his team and take them home, but stayed with Tenten as she woke up as he left her off in her bedroom and started crying and apologizing to him. And so he sat with her, unable to do anything but comfort her and say he was fine until she fell asleep. He tiredly walked into his apartment that night, dragging his feet. He didn't let his pupils know, but it was affecting him too. His determination, and he was sure he was what held their team together in the long run, and when something disastrous happened to any of them, himself included. As he walked into the kitchen he saw a note on his table, and curious, he picked it up and read it. A large smile broke across his face and he started dancing around his apartment, his lost joy returning. "The flames of youth are returning to me. May they never leave me again or my faithful pupils," he cried into the night. Tenten woke up in her wrinkled and filthy clothing. She hugged her legs as she pulled them to her chest seeking comfort. She'd been able to release her feelings and emotions last night on Guy. She was glad that he had stayed with her, she had needed it. With a tired sigh she got out of her bed and stripped off her clothes before stepping into the shower. When she came out she felt slightly better, and she pulled out another of her usual outfits and put it on and redid the buns in her hair, grabbing her weapon scrolls and an apple before leaving. Lee sat up in his bed and looked out the window to the blue sky and birds that flew in it, swooping and diving around. He sighed, stepping out of his bed, and found a clean spandex suit and dragged it on over his body and applied his weights. He ate some breakfast slowly and left his apartment, locking the door behind him. Neji was having a pretty shit day, to be blunt. He has been woken by the sun in his face and fallen out of bed when he turned away from it, and also he hadn't been able to find a battle kimono for him to wear, so he had to wear a white shirt and black pants with his sandals. This of course made many of his fellow female clansmen stare at him, blushing slightly. Then they didn't have anything he wanted for breakfast, so had to settle for an apple, and when he was leaving he had snapped at his cousin simply because she had said good morning to him. Shaking his head he berated himself. As Naruto would say, he needed to get his ass in gear. Guy was bouncing around his apartment happily as he ate some toast at the same time. Today was the day. His team would be reunited and he couldn't wait. They needed it, and so did he if they wished to stay as a team, and with the Chunin exams so close they needed to get it together. Schooling his features and actions, he left his apartment, but he found a grin plastered on his face as he walked to the training grounds where he saw 3/4 of his team already there. He could see they were all looking sullen evenly, but he felt better when Tenten smiled at him. No matter how small it was, it made him feel better. And when his team was completed he was sure they would be laughing and messing around again after beating him, of course. "Good morning, my youthful students," he exclaimed happily, causing all of them to look at him and raise their eyebrows. "I have great news for you. Today will be the day that..." He was stopped abruptly as a kunai landed in the middle of them. He followed its line up to a tree and saw a man looked at them with a look of indifference. "Who are you?" he asked without his vibrancy as he eyed up the man. He was wearing a long black trench coat that was open and he could see a black shirt under it. With his black glasses, combat boots and black hair he looked powerful, and was much taller than him and muscular. If he started a fight they probably wouldn't win. The man looked at him. "I am looking for Team 9, he said with no emotion. "I hear they are the strongest Shinon team in Konoha." "Yes, that is us. What do you want?" The man raised an eyebrow. "You, don't make me laugh. Even I can see that you are weak. I could destroy you all with minimal ease. But I can see something holds you back. You need him, don't you?" "Naruto, that is." Shock crossed all their faces. "You know where he is?" Neji asked, hope in his voice as he looked at the man. "Of course I wouldn't be very good if I didn't know where I was, would I?" A smile appeared on his face as he observed their faces ranging from disbelief, shock and a blush from Tenten. "Of course, if you don't believe me I can prove it." They all nodded at him. "Very well. Lee is a master taijutsu user training under Guy-sensei and hopes to be able to defeat him and take his title and further his flames of youth." They saw his disgust at talking about flames of youth. Neji wants to surpass his clan and prove that the main family is not superior to the branch and wants the two families to merge and become one. Guy loves his pupils and wishes nothing more than training them to become the best and defeating his rival Kakashi once and for all. And Tenten. He trailed off and walked up to her and whispered in her ear, causing her blush to deepen with each passing second, and when he pulled away she jumped onto him, hugging him tightly, muttering, "Naruto-kun," and crying into his chest as he held her. The other three stood still, all thinking the same thing. It must be him. Tenten wouldn't do that unless it's him. When he set her back down on the ground they actually noticed the height difference between them. It was enormous, over a foot. She had to bend her head right back to look at him. He turned to the guys of the group. "Hey," he said simply, "where the hell have you been?" Asked a very pissed off Neji as he glared at him. "Well, I would suggest you sit down for it, cause I'm not picking your ass up when you faint. It all happened after our training session and I was with Hana-chan." And for the next 2 hours he told them everything, having been informed by Shibi and the doctors what had happened to him while he was unconscious. But he was able to tell them what happened with the battle as he was watching it take place. Of course, when he had told them he was a Jinchuriki and that the Kyuubi had been sealed with him, they were taken aback but got past it easily, knowing who he was. And when they found out Kyuubi had been killed they did faint, except for Guy, who asked him to continue. Explaining that he had its power and abilities to the man was great fun to him, as that made the man faint at the end with his pupils. Grinning, he left a note on Lee's head and left to look for Hana. She was hiding in her room covered by the blankets, her eyes red and puffy from crying so much. She hadn't heard anything about Naruto since she took him to the hospital and no one would tell her anything. After the first few days she became worried, and when she asked about him they wouldn't answer, and recently she had just started crying when she stood in the training ground when it all happened and had been in her room since. Her mother had tried to get her out and find out what was wrong, but she refused and threw out anyone who came in. She heard footsteps outside her door and voices as her door was opened slightly. "She's in here, please get her out," she heard her mother's worried voice. "Don't worry Tsume, I guarantee I can." A second voice that she couldn't place. One person walked away and she was alone with this male who closed the door as he entered. "Leave me alone," she said hoarsely to him. The man chuckled and she felt him sit on the edge of her bed. "Do you really think that this is doing anything? It is trapping all your emotions with yourself and that is not good, Hana. You need to release them. What do you think he would say if he saw you like this?" That really shook her up. What would he do? Shout at her for being weak or comfort her? She slowly pulled back her covers and saw him looking at her with a small smile. "There you go." She immediately started to cry again and he pulled her into his arms, getting her cry against him and release it all. She needed this and she knew it, but from a stranger? She smelled him. He smelt of earth, the forest. Her eyes widened and she looked up at him. "Naruto?" she said, and a grin came across his face. "Yes, Hana-chan?" Her resulting hug knocked him onto his back as she sobbed into him and was shouting at him incoherently. "Hana, what happened to you? I've never seen you like this and I practically lived with you all my life," he said over her shouts. "What do you think, Naruto? I didn't know what was happening to you. You could have died for all I knew and I wouldn't have known," she shouted back at him. "I'm sorry, but it was explained to you that I may not come out alive. Besides, I had to come back, remember? I owe you a date for our last fight." He heard her crying stop as she looked up at him with a small blush on her cheeks. You really want to?" she asked quietly. He nodded and she slid up his body and kissed him on her lips gently. "Thank you, Naruto-kun." "HMMPH came a voice from the doorway and they turned to see Tsume standing with her arms crossed and a shit-eating grin on her face. "So can I expect grandchildren anytime soon?" Both blushed bright red. "Mom." Hana whined at her. Naruto had seen all who he needed to, and headed back to the compound. At the gate he was stopped by a swarm of bugs who let him in. He grinned. At least they took his suggestion on the defense of the clan. This way it would be incredibly difficult for anyone to get in and could send for help just as easily. He headed for his home and walked round to the garden where he sat down. Taking off his jacket and shirt leaving him topless, he began meditating and his hive started making up a figure in front of him in a similar position. "Are you ready, Naruto?" the man asked. He simply nodded. "Very well. Try calling on the bugs nearby and ask them to cover your body up to your neck." The ground around them started moving slightly as the called bugs appeared and headed for the boy swarming over him. "Keep control of them and feed them a small amount as well to bond them to you." Naruto did exactly as he was told as a faint haze appeared around him and the bugs stopped moving, then began to cover him, slowly attaching themselves to his body and remaining there. "Very good, Naruto. This is the armor of bugs. It works well against weapons and earth jutsus, but you must remember it's not impenetrable. Fire will still do serious damage as well as water and wind, but as you advance you can negate these with different and stronger bugs." "I understand, sensei." The bugs fell from him and burrowed back into the ground. "Now what?" "Your party piece, Naruto. This is for you and your clan, but it will remain with you." He held out his hand and a small scroll appeared in it. "This is the bug's summoning contract, but I must warn you, unlike other summons there is no head but a ruling body of each species, so when you try to summon one you must picture what it is, be it a spider or a fly, okay?" Naruto nodded. "Good, I suggest you train a little when summoning them as well as improving your techniques. The Chunin exams are nearing. I know, but my team is more than prepared for it now that I'm back. It'll be a piece of cake. Remember, Naruto, don't underestimate anyone in the least, even the weakest can have a good plan and overwhelm you." Naruto smiled and nodded at him again. "Good, now get some rest, okay? I'm out of here and don't forget to spend some time with your lady friends," he said with a wink as Naruto scowled slightly as he dispersed. "Damn perverted men," he muttered, and his bugs gave out a buzzing noise. "I'll be quiet." Nearly a week later and Naruto as well as all the other Jonin teams that made it through the second exam stood before the Hokage as he told them that these exams were a replacement for war, which he nodded along with. This was a good reason to show off a country's power and strength. There are however too many participants present, so there will be a round of preliminaries first. Several people shouted out saying they had made it through but were firmly quietened by Anko, their examiner, who he had caught himself looking at a few times. She was pretty damn hot in her clothes and that fishnet just made him want to take her there and then. He shook off his trail of thoughts. He had began off thinking like that when sparring with Tenten and she had been soaked when he accidentally tripped her into the river near their training grounds. Personally he blamed his damned perverted bloodlines. She looked and saw him looking at her and winked seductively, making him fidget slightly, trying to ignore it, and could only watch as she slowly licked her lips. He closed his eyes tightly, trying not to think of her. "Damn bloodlines making me grow like this. It's as if they want me to be raped by fangirls," he thought. Apparently the influx of Kyuubi's chakra didn't make him grow but in fact age him to about 18 or 19 years old, making him the oldest Shin'an in the room by at least 4 years. Sharing this with his team and friends including his father had been uncomfortable for him, especially when Shibi insisted he go to the hospital to prove it, but of course he was instantly swamped by the females as they clamored to see his body. He paid attention when he heard a new voice speak about matches beginning. He looked up to the new man and heard him ask everyone to step up to the balcony except the combatants, an Uchiha and some other Shin'an just younger than him. The matches were all pretty tame but he paid attention to each in case he had to fight any later in the third exam. He smirked when two of the girls, one with pink hair and the other with blonde, were not even fighting. He would call it a cat fight and he could see all the kunoichi in the room looked disgusted at them except for Neiji's cousin who was looking at him with a small blush. It livened up a little with Lee fighting one of the sand ninja who looked psychotic in his opinion. He had been led to removing his weights just to have a possibility of defeating the strange child who used sand, but when he saw Lee about to be killed by him, Guy reacted instantly, and stood in front of him protecting him. The medics came rushing out and carried him off quickly to the emergency rooms and he was about to go after them but was stopped by Tenten, and was told he would be disqualified if he left. He grudgingly remained as Tenten went to her match versus the female Sandnin. She was very pretty, he had to admit, but when he saw her fan he knew she would win. He was proved right as all of Tenten's attacks were negated. She was her complete weakness, attacking at range with wind that was both defensive and offensive but did not mean she had to insult her. Naruto was getting madder with every taunt and the other genins looked at him with fear as he started to bend the railings in his hands. She was knocked into the air by one of the wind attacks and came crashing down onto the edge of her folded-up fan. His rage built up here as he saw the woman throw Tenten towards some of her discarded weapons but was caught by Naruto who appeared to catch her. He shifted her weight and stood up walking towards tall blonde Jinan and he could see fear as he got closer until he was right in front of her. She looked frightened as he leaned down to her ear. Just because your brother has a demon, does mean you have to be one. She stood stock still as he walked off with her to the infirmary. He knows. Shit, what do we do now? She slowly walked off back to her teammates. Another match with Neji against Hinata was exciting, to see two users of the Juken fighting. But in the end it was Neji who won because of his experience with it. Naruto had come back to see the end and it was his match. He grinned as he walked down to the arena with Kiba facing him. So you get to face me, eh? Just because my sister likes you doesn't mean I'm gonna take it easy on you, Naruto. He simply nodded and the match begun. Kiba started first as he ran at him, throwing a smoke bomb covering him. But within seconds of Kiba going inside he was thrown out and slammed against the wall. The smoke cleared to see Naruto standing exactly like he had been before. Such tactics will not work against me, Kiba. Try again. He growled as he stood up and called Akamaru over and gave him a small pill. Let's go, Akamaru, said Dog jumped onto his back while Naruto watched unmoving. Beast clone transformation. They watched as they were shrouded in smoke and it cleared to show a second Kiba and they looked more feral with long claws and were on all fours. Take him down. One roared and they disappeared in a blur of speed, and before Naruto could take his hands out of his pockets he was hit on both sides and thrown hard into a wall as a crater appeared around him. "Ya, take that," he cheered but was silenced as the boy stood up and pulled himself out of the wall. Nice move, Kiba. However, he removed his jacket to show a white short-sleeved t-shirt showing off his muscles. It's not just that easy, and they watched as he became feral as well, with his nails turning into claws and landing on all fours. Gatsuga. He formed a whirlwind as he dived at the two. They jumped away so he missed and he dug up a trench in the ground, the debris flying everywhere. But then Kiba was sent across the room as he was kicked in the back by Naruto. "How did you do that?" he asked, struggling to stand. "I used Kawarmi with a rock. That wasn't enough though, I'm sure." He jumped quickly to avoid another whirlwind from the second Kiba. Close but not enough. He disappeared from sight and was behind Kiba. Good match, and he knocked him out. He sighed as he picked up his jacket but didn't put it on. "I better check on Tenten," and he left the arena and went back to the infirmary. He walked up to the bed she was in. She was awake at least. "Are you okay, Tenten?" he asked her quietly. "Yeah, I'm fine, Naruto-kun, though they won't let me leave because I might strain myself by walking." She pouted at him. He chuckled and walked over to the doctor. He looked serious but then nodded and Naruto came back grinning. "They agreed to let you go." She tried to jump out of the bed, but he stopped her. "Although we had to come to a compromise, you're not allowed to walk." "But then how do I go anywhere?" she asked angrily. "Like this." He put one arm under her legs and the other round her back and lifted her up easily. She screamed at him then started blushing as he walked out of the room. In the arena all the Jinan who won their matches were standing in front of the Hokage as well as Naruto, who was still holding Tenten. As the man explained, the third exam, a month, eh? Plenty of time, he thought, and he continued to think. These are the slips you pick out, to decide who you will be fighting in the last exam. Anko came round with a box which everyone took one out of. When it came to him she stopped and he saw her give a glare to Tenten, who returned it. He chuckled but then realized he had no hands to do so. With a grin he flipped Tenten up over his shoulder and put an arm round waist to stop her falling. She was screaming at him and beating his back as he took out a slip of paper. He looked up to see all the male Genin looking at him and took a glance up to Tenten and realized he had her ass beside his face. With a small cough he brought her down and the Genin groaned as she beat Naruto for doing that to her. He whispered into her ear which made her stop struggling, and she turned to glare at the other guys in the room as she pulled out a kunai and started playing with it and a practice stab at them. They immediately looked away up to the Sandaime, who chuckled slightly and dismissed them. Naruto wandered around Konoha by himself, having left Tenten at her apartment and politely declined training with Neji for the exam. He looked around wondering how he got to the hot springs. Shrugging, he was about to leave when he heard giggling. Looking around again he saw an old man sitting in a tree overlooking the woman's baths. He gave a slight scowl. He couldn't stand for that, and so he sent his bugs up the tree where they stopped beside the man not moving. His eye twitched as he tried to remain calm. "Why are my bugs perverted?" he wondered as he commanded them to move the man, and with reluctance he saw them move up behind and swarm the man, who screamed like a girl and ran around trying to get them off him. He stopped running and flared his chakra, removing them from him, and followed their trail as they returned to their host, and saw a young man looking at him through his dark glasses. "What do you think you are doing?" he shouted. "I was doing research." "Research that involves you observing the naked female form?" he asked. "Yeah, for I am the so famed Jiraiya the Toad Sannin, writer of the best-selling books on the earth." As he summoned a frog and did a dramatic pose, as Naruto stood unimpressed. "I was taking you seriously until the dance," he said slowly. The frog's tongue flew out and struck him in the chest, but he dispersed into bugs which traveled along its tongue and spread over its body, causing it to disappear. Jiraiya watched as the bugs all gathered in one spot and reformed into the kid. "Who are you? I have the feeling I know you from somewhere. You should know me. You helped my father design the seal to keep the beast at bay." Jiraiya stood shocked to hear this young man was Naruto. Last time he checked he was blonde and was 14. "But you're too old, and he had blonde hair for a start." He spoke his confusion. "Yes, Shibi and my friends were quite shocked, but how was I to know that killing the Kyuubi would age me 5 years? The man went bug-eyed and started sputtering. You kill Kyuubi? Not possible." "Well, yes, my bloodlines helped with the process. I was simply the cage for the battle they fought." "What do you mean? How could they? You have more than one," he screamed. "For a Sannin who don't know much, do you?" "Yes, I have more than one. The Sharingan, bug host technique, control over shadows, my heightened senses, and a second persona, as well as all the benefits of a demon," he finished. "Brat, be my apprentice." The man was on his knees in front of him. "Why?" he asked suspiciously. "You can learn all the jutsus I know and can help me write my books," he pleaded. "And what do you get?" "I get to show you off to Tsunade and beat her apprentice." He grinned at him. Naruto thought it over, making the man sweat it out. "Will you train me for the Chunin exams in a month?" Jiraiya nodded vigorously. "Fine then, you got an apprentice." Jiraiya stood up and danced gleefully around the area as Naruto watched amusedly. He suddenly stopped, and pulled the scroll off of his back. "First sign this," he asked. "What is it?" "It's the summoning contract for the toads. I already have a summon, thanks." "What do you have then?" "Bugs," he answered simply. "I thought as much." "Well, there's a few jutsu you can't learn then without the toads as your summon." Naruto shrugged. "Oh well then, let's go." He began to walk off. "Hey, where are you going?" He was suddenly pushed by some bugs from behind. "We are going to begin my training now," Jiraiya whimpered. He was going to lose a lot of research time. The stadium was packed. The crowds were cheering and the participants stood slightly nervously in the middle of the arena. However, not all were there. 3 were missing. The one Sound Nin had apparently been killed, and both Sasuke and Naruto hadn't appeared. His friends and teammates were worried he might be disqualified, but were relieved when he rose from the ground with his hands in his pockets and face almost completely hidden by the glasses and coat, although Sasuke still didn't turn up. Those who had passed were Naruto, Neji, Sasuke, Shino, Temari, Gaara, Kankuro and Shikamaru. The matches were Naruto vs Sasuke, Gaara vs Shino, Shikamaru vs Temari, and Neji vs Kankuro. Shino's match was first, so the others were asked to move to the viewing balcony. Naruto shared a look with Gaara as he twitched slightly. As he was walking past Shino, he stopped and spoke. "Should you need it, my hive is readily available for your use. Good luck, brother." Shino nodded and Naruto walked up the steps to overlook the match. The first strike was from Gaara as Sand struck out at his opponent, hoping to kill him quickly, but the Genin dispersed into bugs and scattered all over the clearing before trying to surround him, but more sand protected him and drove the insects away. Gaara searched for him and a smirk came across his face as his sand lay on the ground and began to disappear into it, driving Shino out to face him. Naruto saw Gaara say something to him, making Shino flinch, and more sand attacked him, making Shino dodge and use his bugs to defend him from the tendrils of sand as they whipped around wildly after him. He saw Shino look up at him and he nodded, and holding out his arm his bugs trailed out and flew down to the arena and merged with Shino's hive, doubling his amount, and he wasted no time in launching the large amount at the sand user, who drew all his sand back to encase him. However, the bugs started to burrow into the sand and the stadium watched as and began to fall from the shield and expose the boy inside, who looked scared as his body was encased with bugs, and the last of the sand fell down as Gaara fainted from chakra exhaustion and Shino was declared the winner. Cheering followed the verdict and Naruto's bugs came back to him where they merged with him again. Shino came back into the room and turned to Naruto. "Thank you, brother, your hive was much appreciated. Konoha will be shown how powerful our generation is, and what to expect in the future from us," and he walked down to the arena to wait for Sasuke so he could fight him. Naruto was getting impatient. He had been standing for nearly 10 minutes waiting for his opponent, who had the audacity to be late while facing him. He looked up into the stands and saw Hana was with the purple-haired Proctor Anko, who winked slowly at him, and another woman who he believed was a Jounin sensei for Team 8. She was quite beautiful. She wore a bandage-style dress for mobility and flexibility, had wild unkempt hair with her delicate features and red wine eyes. She had a small smile on her face when she saw him looking up at her and nodded slightly. He saw the proctor was about to speak when he sensed chakra gather near him. He held up his hand to silence the man, who looked questioningly at him. Then a swirl of leaves and a small gust of wind blew in the middle of the arena, revealing Kakashi and his opponent. "Yo, are we late?" said the masked Jounin. "You would have been disqualified if not for him." He pointed at Naruto. "He stopped me just before you appeared. I think he sensed the chakra you were using for the sunshine." Naruto nodded slowly, making Sasuke snort, while Kakashi looked him over. "He must be good to sense that amount of chakra. Whatever, let's just get this over with. I want to fight that Gaara kid. He has been already knocked out." Aburame Shino defeated him. A scowl came across his face and he glared at the proctor. "Let's go then." He walked to face Naruto with an arrogant smirk. "You'll wish you didn't have to fight me. I'm the strongest Genin in years, if you say so, Uchiha-san. But I believe that is my brother. After all, had he not defeated you in more spars than you care to admit?" he asked with a small grin, hidden by his collar when he saw Sasuke glare at him. The match was started and Sasuke wasted no time and ran at him, preparing to strike him with a kick, which was easily blocked and countered, leaving him with a painful ankle. You're good, but I was hardly trying." "Good, I was hoping to have to move from this spot for the match." He was glared at again as Sasuke did some seals and launched a fireball at him, only to be negated as a wall of earth rose up. "You are not the only one to have one-on-one training over the month," Naruto spoke, forming more seals as a dragon head of earth rose up and fired balls of compacted mud at the Uchiha, who had to activate his bloodline to dodge them. Naruto came in following one of the mud balls, catching him off guard and successfully throwing him across the arena into a wall. "So much for the strongest Genin then. I was right, my brother is much stronger. Even with your bloodline you have no chance." The whole stadium was then filled with the sound of birds chirping and a blue light penetrating through the smoke caused by the impact on the wall. As it blew away, Sasuke was stood there with a maniacal grin on his face and a ball of lightning in his hand. "I'll teach you to insult the Uchiha name, weakling," he screamed as he charged at Naruto considerably faster than before. However, he didn't move at all except bringing his hand up, and a ball of blue chakra appeared in it and Naruto thrust it forwards to meet Sasuke as he copied the motion. All was silent in the seconds before the two techniques hit. There was only the crackling of lightning and sound of wind as it blew, then a large thundering noise as the two pure chakra attacks hitting and struggling against each other, and a final explosion as one gave way in smoke. Dust and chunks of earth clouded the two from vision. Everyone watched with wide eyes, waiting to see who would make it out on top. Hana was clutching the bar in front of her and had each of the two women holding tightly onto her arms. They saw a head of black hair first, followed by glasses and black jacket standing over an unconscious Uchiha. A moment of silence before everyone was standing cheering at the display of strength from them. Naruto took a moment to look around them and saw Hana looked very relieved and was smiling at him like the other two women. Then the two Genin's respective senseis appeared beside their student and there were loud murmurs as one of the Sannin stood next to Naruto and one of the most powerful Jounins in Konoha beside the other. Jiraiya grinned at Kakashi, who simply picked up Sasuke and carried him out of the arena to the infirmary. He got back up to the balcony after a few words with Jiraiya and he wasn't best pleased. Word of an invasion by Ado? They were a new village in the last few years and expected to be able to beat them? He snorted silently to himself as he looked over the match between the blonde Tsunagenon and Shikamaru, one of his brother's classmates. It was mainly a lot of bull to him. He could probably take on both and win, but was impressed by their strategies and plans, but she still managed to win even with being trapped by his jutsu after he gave up. And so was the last match of the first round of his teammate against the Sooner puppeteer. Once again it wasn't exciting. Neji had the ability of seeing the chakra strings of the puppeteer and so would cut them every time they were reconnected, winning him the match. The second rounds were promising for a good show of power. The first match, his own versus his brother, who seemed uneasy with fighting him but agreed to the match. It was pretty much one-sided. In terms of power, Naruto had more experience and control with his hive because of the accelerated bloodline and techniques because of his humongous chakra reserves, and he dominated the arena with his jutsus and strength, forcing Shino to forfeit and soon pass out. He left the field for the next match, Neji against the remaining Sandanin. Another good match, however, because she was a long-range attacker he couldn't get near enough to attack her as her wind attacks kept him away with the threat of decapitating him. He reluctantly gave her the match, leaving her with a smirk which soon fell off her face as she looked at him, and dread filled her, fearing her next opponent. The remaining two were given 20 minutes to rest and prepare. She stared at him, her body giving an involuntary shudder at his calm and unmoving posture. He was so still, almost as if he were dead, but with the fact she could feel the chakra from him and the bugs flying around him as he looked at her. They both looked at the proctor, who flinched slightly, seeing the looks on their faces. Well, on hers he couldn't see most of Naruto's. He raised his hand. "Begin." And just as he finished the word, a huge gust of wind courtesy of Temari blasted through the arena. It was obvious she was trying to end this quickly, however her plan was gone as she saw him standing there but with what looked like a layer of bugs covering him, and as he moved she could see they were indeed acting like armor. "The armor of bugs is quite powerful," she heard him say quietly, "but you managed to wound me." A smirk came across her face. "Good, I knew you weren't so tough." But he chuckled. "I said you wounded me." He held up his hand and her anger rose at seeing some blood on one of his fingers. "Not that it could slow me or anything," she growled as she unleashed another wind attack against him as he defended himself but was struck in the side as she swung her fan into him, sending him sideways, his glasses skidding along the ground where they smashed against a chunk of earth from one of the earlier matches. As he looked at her she gasped at his eyes, red with a black iris and a black line around it. The combination of his Sharingan and shadow skills. "You'll pay for that." He stood up slowly as his chakra flared lightly and shadows from around the arena started moving, surrounding her. She looked around, frightened as she was trapped in the middle. This was a stronger version of the shadow jutsu used against her in her first match. She'd been able to escape that with her logic and quick thinking, but now that was all for squat. Looking up at him, her eyes widened as she looked at him. His eyes were now a solid black and then suddenly turned to red, and she felt her mind being pulled and she fell unconscious. She woke up looking at red sky and moon and all the black around her. She was tied to a cross by her wrists and ankles, struggling against her bindings. "It's no use, you will not escape from here. After all, it is my mind." She heard a chuckle. Turning, she saw Naruto standing there with his hands in his pockets staring at her. She suddenly felt extremely vulnerable as he looked at her. "Are you going to rape me?" she asked, fear present in her voice as tears came to her eyes. "I feel insulted that you believe me to be that kind of person, Temari-chan," he said to her. Breathing in relief and blushing from what she called her, she looked at him. "Then what will you do?" "This is my Mangekyo Sharingan, and with it I have pulled into my mind to do as I wish. Time in here is slower than the real world, resulting with what is 3 days in here is actually a second in the real world." He finished the small explanation, seeing her with wide eyes. "You can do anything?" He nodded. "Yes, anything that I wish to happen or create, such as..." A katana formed in his hand. "Normally I would repeatedly stab someone trapped in this for the 3 days, then release them." She shivered, but the katana dissolved. "However, as this is only a small match, I see no need to permanently destroy your mind, so I shall do something else." She saw the grin on his face. A woman appeared beside him. She recognized her as an Inuzuka with the stripes on her cheeks and feral look. "This is one of my close friends, Hana-chan, and she shall assist me." Fear once again appeared on her face. "What are you going to do?" she asked quietly. He smiled. "I wouldn't worry, it won't harm you. You never know, you might get some ideas in the end." "What do you?" She watched with wide eyes as the woman turned to him and started to kiss him while running her hands through his hair as he groped her. She couldn't turn her head away and so was forced to watch as they discarded their clothes. She was screaming pervert at him as they had sex on the floor right in front of her, and not that she would admit it, she was rather turned on by it. In the real world they saw Temari fall over and the Sharingan in his eyes, and she began to move around on the ground before her eyes opened and she looked at him before shooting back with a huge nosebleed. Naruto smirked as Genma called the match in his favor. There was some clapping at first that grew into a loud roaring, and he bowed to them before walking over to Temari to see if she was okay. She was muttering in her sleep about hot blondes and brown-haired babes. He chuckled as he gently slapped her cheeks, forcing her awake. She blushed as she saw him looking at her and then slapped him hard across his face. You ever do that to me again, I'll personally castrate you, got it? She swore at him. He nodded with a smile. That would be so more believe if you weren't turned on so much right now, he said with a chuckle as he helped her up. She huffed and picked up her fan before walking out of the arena away from him. Naruto stood in the arena. Everyone was cheering for him as the two Kages stood in front of him. The Hokage came forwards holding a Chunin flak jacket and presented it to him with a bow. Aburame Naruto, I present you with the promotion to Chunin for your wits and skills on the battlefield. Naruto accepted it and bowed to him and the Kazekage. Thank you, Kage-sama. He put it on under his jacket. He followed the two Kages off the arena and headed towards the Hokage tower. All of his friends were together chatting happily about his promotion, Hana most of all. I can't believe he actually made it, even against the Uchiha and the Kazekage's daughter as well. I hope he takes me out tonight, she sighed dreamily imagining what it could be like. Tenten's head turned to look at her in a blur. What did you say? She screeched. I said I hope he takes me out tonight. He promised me a date. The weapons mistress' face visibly saddened and she ran off. They watched her as she disappeared round a building and looked back at Hana. What I say? It was Shino that spoke up. Tenten-san is attracted to my brother, just as you are, and if I'm not mistaken from the hormones, as is the Sankunoichi. Hana's face saddened, and she too walked off. What the hell is with the girls today? Shouted Kiba, who was silenced when his mother came up and hit him on the head. You just don't understand, Kiba. Now come on, we're leaving. He turned and followed her with a quick goodbye to them. Naruto stood wide-eyed in front of both Kages. You want me to do what? He said calmly despite what was running through his head. Yes, Naruto-kun, I want you to marry my daughter. This will strengthen the treaty between our two villages. He stared at the Hokage, who flinched slightly at the power emanating from him. I assume you also want me to? He wasn't sure how to go about this. He sighed. I would like you to, but I am not forcing you into it. This is completely your decision as well as hers. The look on his face showed his true age. He was just an old man who wanted a peaceful life. Unfortunately, Naruto's soft and more logical side kicked in at this moment. If I do this, our villages will have an almost perfect treaty, and if I don't, they will take it as an insult and may declare war or stop all trading, and that wouldn't be good for the old man. God damn my logic, he cursed inwardly, thinking to himself. Both Kages looked at him waiting for an answer. I accept. Smiles broke out on the two men. Thank you, Naruto-kun. You've ensured our villages remain allies as well as economical standards remaining high. The Kazekage bowed to him. The Hokage watched as Naruto bowed, but much more stiffly than before. Naruto-kun, you are dismissed. Training grounds 13 is free. Naruto nodded to him and dispersed into bugs, and not 2 seconds later a huge surge of chakra spread through Konoha and a huge explosion and cloud of dust filled the sky. The Sand Cage looked down to the older man. Was that him? He asked, amazed and shocked. The old man just nodded tiredly. Yes, it was. I could tell he needed to relieve some anger. You should know he did not want this but accepted for the village's sake. I assumed as much. My daughter will probably react just as badly as he did. Naruto stood with his hand burned raw from the sheer amount of chakra he had held in it a little while ago. It was quickly healing in a red glow. He was supposed to marry the Kazekage's daughter. He admitted to himself she was attractive, and had they known each other for a while he may have asked her out, but to be forced into a marriage with her was too quick. The one thing that made him accept was that it was for the village's sake. He was suddenly aware of several strong chakra signatures appearing around him. Aburame-san, are you okay? Asked one Anbu. Hi, just a little stressed, that's all. It's not every day you are placed into an arranged marriage. The Anbu took a step back. He caused this much damage because of a marriage? Very well then, we shall leave you, and with a gesture to the others they disappeared. For 2 days nobody saw him, not even his family, the Hokage or his fiancée. However, unluckily this was the day of the auto invasion. They would have been completely caught off guard if not for Jiraiya sending news of them moving. The village was prepared, all ninja were called back and the villagers put into the bunker in the Hokage mountain. All they had to do now was wait, but they had not planned for Auto to use summons in the battle, as several large snake summons broke through the walls followed by the invading ninja. They were picked off by the Jounin and Chunin while the Anbu tried to take down the snakes with little success. They needed the Sannin, or at least someone with a large summon. Their prayers were answered as the sun was suddenly blocked out by a huge plume smoke, and when it cleared what was revealed was a huge spider and 2 smaller ones on either side, which ran towards the snakes and began fighting. No one knew who summoned them, but they were helping and with a loud cheer began to fight back with much more force than before against the more numerous enemy. Even on the street there were more spiders that killed all of the fleeing ninja or trapping them in their webs where the Konoha ninja killed them. The battle barely lasted more than an hour, but somehow Orochimaru had gotten in without anyone knowing and engaged their Hokage in a fight. It was then found out he was the leader of Sound and wanted to destroy Konoha. Sarutobi managed to make him flee, but not without a price. The sword Orochimaru had used, the Kusanagi, had severed the man's spine, never allowing him to walk again, but even through this it was a victory for Konoha. Several medics were running around the hospital, which had luckily not been destroyed in the invasion, tending to the injured as well as any other ninja that knew how to heal. It was here where the Hokage sat in his bed looking out the window at Konoha. "They need a new cage," spoke a voice from the doorway. He turned and smiled at him. "Naruto-kun. How are you? Where have you been? We were all worried about you, even your young fiancé." He saw that Naruto didn't even seem angry about it anymore. "I needed to sort out my feelings regarding this marriage." He saw the look appear on the man's face. "Do not worry, I will still go through with it. And as for the invasion, I was there. Whose summons do you think they were?" The man was shocked. It was him that had driven back the ninja and killed so many of them, as well as capture them. "When did you learn to summon?" he asked curiously. "In the month for our Chunin exams. I got the contract from my bloodline." Sarutobi nodded in understanding. "I see. Is it for your clan then?" He nodded. "Yet another contract. We've built up quite a few over the years, slugs, snakes, frogs, apes and others, now the bugs." He chuckled. He then heard the window open and Jiraiya stepped in. "The Gaki is right, we need a new Hokage, and it sure as hell ain't gonna be me, got it?" he said, pointing at the old man. "I had no intention of even asking you." "Yeah, well, your teammates tried to rope me into it. I told them I knew of someone better." "Oh? And that would be?" "My other teammate, Tsunade." Sarutobi paled. "You can't be serious, Jiraiya. I mean, she can get very violent," said man sighed. "We don't have any other choice unless you want to put Kakashi as Hokage." He didn't need any other persuasion as he ordered Jiraiya to find her along with his apprentice, who simply nodded and left to prepare. He stood at the gate with his father as Jiraiya walked towards them. He had insisted that he accompany him to the gate and talk to the Sannin. He gestured the man to walk with him and they stood a little way off, and he saw a book exchange hands as Shibi bade goodbye and hurried off as Jiraiya came back smiling. "He bought a book, no?" The smile slipped off his face. "How did you know?" "I have read one or two before. The plot is sound as well as the art within it. There is a little too much sex for my liking, but I manage," Naruto said with a calm tone. "Wait, so read my books but you don't like me peeping for the research that goes in my books?" And for the first time he saw shock come across his face. "You use that for your books? I'm so sorry, I shall not stop you again, unless it involves Hana-chan, Ten-chan or Tamari." He became calm again. "Shall we go?" And with a smirk from Jiraiya they turned and left Konoha, not to return until they have the goddamn with them. "Arg, where the fuck is she, Jiraiya? I'm getting fucking pissed off," shouted the irritated Chunin as the older man shrank back sweating. "I don't know, please don't hurt me," he begged, but all was in vain as he was kicked through the doors of a bar and ended up in a seat upside down. "Jiraiya? What are you doing here?" spoke a familiar voice. He looked up from his position and saw the most beautiful sight he had seen in years, as well as his rescuer. "Tsunade, please save me, he's mad." He dragged himself up and hid behind her. "What the hell are you talking about?" "Goddamn, Jiraiya, leading me around guessing where she is, when I get my hands on him." She looked up to the door and saw a man walk in, muttering to himself, looking around. "Naruto, I found her. You can't get mad at me now." The man looked over to them and she found, for some reason, herself blushing slightly. He sat down in front of her. "Oh, I can't? You led me around for the last 2 weeks guessing. You're lucky to be alive now, shut up." The man whimpered and went quiet, still hiding behind the slug Sannin, shocking her. This guy was a hell of a lot younger than either of them, and here he was bossing Jiraiya around, who was stubborn as hell, and he was listening. "So you're Tsunade then?" She nodded, trying not to look at his face, still with a small red tinge on her face. She looked to her apprentice, who was in a similar predicament but a lot redder. "Is there a reason you are not looking at me? That is very impolite, you know?" She raised her head up to look at him slowly and saw he was drinking her sake. "Who are you?" she asked, a little quieter than normal. Unfortunately, Jiraiya noticed this and a smirk came across his face, and he whispered in her ear and was soon smacked through the doors again with a loud smash, leaving her bright red. "I am Aburame Naruto, his apprentice." Her eyes widened. "He took on another apprentice? I didn't know," she murmured to herself. "Hi," I believe his exact words were, "I get to show you off to Tsunade and beat her apprentice, but now that I think about it, I'm not sure it was worth it." He looked behind him out the door. "How far did you hit him?" he questioned. She shrugged. "Don't know, don't care, I could do without him really. But I've heard the name Naruto before, though it sounds so familiar," she said out loud. "You may have, it was most likely me." Was it about the child who had multiple Konoha bloodlines in his possession, as well as being the container of the Kyuubi? She nodded. "Then yes, it is me." She observed him. "Which ones, except for the Aburames?" "I have the Inuzukas, Uchihas, and the Naras. I have extreme control over each one. To prove it, he made his shadow connect with her and her arms rose up and poked her cheek before releasing her. Don't you need to move your own body for the bloodline to work? She questioned. He shook his head. I have extreme control, remember, I control the shadows to a large extent. How does your body cope with all these bloodlines? I think QB made my body adapt to each one and they are all part of my DNA now, so my kids should have them as well. I dare say the council will try to make me impregnate women if they found out about it. Tsunade scowled. The council was always trying to get new bloodlines and improve them. Why are you here anyway? Jiraiya said you were looking for me. Konoha was invaded several weeks ago by Otto. She nodded, having heard about it, and Orochimaru wounded the Sandaime, paralyzing him from the waist down permanently. Her eyes widened. And why did you come to find me? To heal him? She asked, suspicious of him. We need you to become the god Daime. You are the only person capable. Besides, do you really want Jiraiya as Hokage? He'll allow peeping on the hot springs for all men, he said, playing on her hatred of perverts. She scowled at the thought. As much as I don't want that to happen, I can't go back. That place reminds me too much of what I've lost. It's too painful to think about. He saw the sadness and pain in her eyes. I see, so you cannot accept it and move on then. She glared at him. What do you know about it? I lost my brother and my lover in that village and they did shit all about it. She screamed at him, her eyes wet. She heard him sigh. You are not the only one who has lost, Tsunade. I lost both my father and mother to the QB. I am only lucky Shibi adopted me before the council had been killed or given to Danzo. But you must remember, I contain the QB, and do you know what it's like to be hated for something you had no control over? I had no choice but to take the glares and the hate, and fortunately I have persevered through it even with knowing about it being sealed in me. She stared at him, regretting what she had said before. What do you mean contained? Surely it's still sealed? He shook his head. No, it is dead. I fought him and killed him with the help of my bloodlines while Hiashi kept the chakra bound in one place to help out. She was shocked. He had killed the QB, a creature of untold power and death, with the help of his bloodlines? Is that why you look so old? Yes, the chakra absorption aged me by 6 or 7 years, as well as giving me the power of one tail, while the others are held back by another seal which I can release when needed, and accelerating my bloodlines to unparalleled heights and power. And with another demonstration he used his Sharingan to make her think she was naked with a genjutsu. When she tried to dispel it, she found she couldn't and covered herself up looking at him, and her clothes reappeared, and she gave a sigh. Enough with the making me look like an idiot, okay? He nodded with a smile that made her blush. So will you return to Konoha and become Hokage? He asked seriously. She sat for a few moments in silence and thought. She looked back up at him. Are you sure there is no one else? Jiraiya was the only one powerful enough. But you can kick him around because of the higher rank. He saw her eyes light up with mischievousness. And I can put on Boo around the hot springs and stop his peeping too. She chuckled to herself. I take that as a yes? She nodded. Yeah, it is. Now we celebrate. She waved to the bartender, who brought over several bottles of sake to their table as Shizune shook her head in exasperation. Come on, Shizune, this is as good a reason as any to drink. Someone needs to be sober enough to drag you back to the hotel, and I'm sure it won't be him, she said, pointing at Naruto, who was downing his second bottle of the alcohol. What? He asked, slurring his voice slightly. Tsunade smirked at him. You reckon you can drink more than me? She challenged. He smiled. I bet I can. They split up the sake into equal piles and began their challenge. 3 hours, lots of sake, and 2 shit-faced people later. Tsunade fell onto the table face first, giggling loudly as Naruto lounged back in his chair, finishing off the last bottle. Su-chan, we's outta sake, he exclaimed sadly. We bet it gets more than Naru-kun, she replied. Yuz is pissed. Yuz can't even speak rights. Shizune had left them after they were an hour in, saying they could find their own way to the hotel. No, we need sleeps, Naru-kun. It's not goods if we's don't sleeps, she said, pulling herself up and trying to stand but fell back down. You's right, Su-chan. Comes on, Il's help. He stood up swaying and he held onto the table and moved round to her, and she leaned on him for support, as he put his arm round her waist to balance himself. They staggered out, leaving a tired but happy barkeep who was a lot richer from the pair, and they walked down the street giggling and shouting. She opened the door and saw that Shizune wasn't in the room, but brushed it aside as they collapsed on the bed with her on top of him. Even in her drunken state she was able to blush. She moved off of him and up to the pillows, where she grabbed one and rubbed her head against it with a sigh. She looked down at Naruto and saw him pull off the jacket he was wearing, and it fell off him and onto the bed, where he put it on the chair, and he took off his shoes as well, letting her see his muscles moving under the tight t-shirt even in the dark. He lay beside her with a small sigh and pulled her towards him, wrapping her arms round her waist, and she put her head under his chin and they fell asleep. Giggling was heard by Tsunade as she groaned because of the headache she had from last night. She smiled. It had been fun, and she'd never met anyone who could keep up with her with drinking or who could be so fun and polite at the same time. She moved into the heat beside her and the giggling got louder. It sounded familiar and was unwelcome at the moment, and she pulled herself up to see the white-haired pervert, known better as Jiraiya, writing in a book. As he looked at them, she snarled at him and he jumped in the air and ran out of the room frightened. She sighed and fell back down onto the bed and tightened her grip round him. She looked at the sleeping man who held her. She blushed as he mumbled something and moved in his sleep, bringing her closer. Feeling the muscles of his chest pressed against her breasts was a pleasant feeling, and she gave a small moan and rubbed up against him. Naruto blearily opened his eyes and shut them again quickly as the sun burned his face. He clutched what he held in his arms, bringing them closer, and he heard a moan from it. Opening one eye this time to look, he saw Tsunade with her eyes closed and her body up against his. Both of his eyes opened and he stared at her. The early morning sun was behind her, lighting up her blonde hair like the sun itself, as well as her features, the small button nose and lush lips with her soft skin. She was absolutely beautiful. She opened her own eyes to look at him and blushed seeing him staring at her. "Morning, Naru-kun," she said quietly, almost embarrassed about it, the memories of last night coming back to him with a pet name. "Morning to you too, Su-chan." Her blush deepened and they stared at each other for a while more before Shizune came in and started shrieking at them. "Calm down, Shizune, we didn't sleep together, okay?" she said tiredly, looking at her apprentice still wrapped in his warm embrace. "Now let me sleep." She yawned and closed her eyes, leaning into his neck. Shizune stood shocked. She had never seen her master ever be this close with a man except for her uncle, and here was someone who she had met last night, and she was hugging him tightly as the two fell asleep again. She closed the curtains for them and walked out with a glance back at the pair and closed the door. Jiraiya sat with Shizune in the bar of the hotel, sulking at his loss of research material. He kept glaring at the woman beside him. Somehow he had lost his findings and all that remained was a senbone, but it wasn't her apparently. He heard someone sit down beside him and turned to see a smiling Tsunade. Now he had seen her happy before, but this was a whole other kind of happy. The sort of happy was reserved for when you had something good happen to you or found out something good. "Why are you so cheerful?" he asked grumpily but also curious. She sighed. "A good sleep," she said simply, putting her hand on her cheek and looking at him. "Why does it matter?" He shrugged with a smirk. "No reason. Where's Naruto?" "He's having a shower, shouldn't be long and we can go." His eyes widened. "You'll come back?" She nodded. "Yep, he convinced me to last night. I never knew how hard it could be to be a Jinchuriki. He's had it rough." He nodded. "They all do. It's why they have to be treated with care and understanding." They were interrupted by Shizune. "Tsunade-sama, why were you with him last night? You only met him a few hours ago," she asked. "Yeah, I'm curious about that too. You're not one to do that regularly, if at all," he added. She was blushing slightly, making them ever more curious. "We had too much to drink and we just fell asleep on the bed, that's all," she said quietly. "A little? You sold out the store as far as I'm aware," Shizune said, lecturing her master. "So you drank out the shop and you're saying that nothing happened between you two while in the room all alone?" he asked, emphasizing the last word. She blushed and looked away. "Yes, I'm sure nothing happened except for the sleeping bit and being in his arms," she mumbled to herself, sighing happily. "You know, Tsunade, if I wasn't afraid of dying I'd say you like him." She shot up, blushing and glaring at him. "If you're so afraid, then why did you say it?" she growled at him. He backed away, hiding behind her apprentice. "Nothing, I didn't say anything," he screamed, and she sat down again. "Do you have to be so loud in the morning, Jiraiya? It is rather annoying," they heard Naruto say as he walked in holding his head. "Goddamn hangover," he said quietly, but Tsunade heard him. She walked over to him and placed her hand, which was covered in healing chakra, and placed it on his head. He gave a pleasured sigh as his headache disappeared. "Thanks a lot, Su-chan." He smiled and she blushed. "So nothing happened, huh?" It was Shizune who spoke this time, and he gave a chuckle. No. We were drunk and we fell asleep in each other's arms," he said, looking straight at her. "Why? Was your mind thinking of what we may have been doing under those sheets?" Shizune turned a deep red along with Tsunade while Jiraiya had another book out and was scribbling furiously in it. "Is everybody ready to go?" "We just need to get our bags and we can leave," said Tsunade. "Okay, grab them and let's go." The two women went up to their rooms, leaving Jiraiya and Naruto. "Oi, what did you two do up there?" he said quietly to him. "I told you already." "Come on, Gaki, you expect me to believe that? You had the most beautiful woman in the elemental countries in bed and you didn't do anything?" "That is the truth." Jiraiya scowled at him. "You can't be my apprentice." "A true apprentice would have done something," Naruto sighed. "I'll tell you one thing." The man's eyes lit up. "She doesn't wear underwear," he said, and he walked off outside. "That's my boy," shouted Jiraiya as he too went outside to wait for the others. Tsunade kept looking over at Jiraiya, who was staring at her funnily with a grin. She scowled and looked forward, watching the back of Naruto as he walked ahead of them. He wasn't like anyone she'd had ever known except for Dan. Images of him and her flashed through her head and she shook it to clear them. However, Naruto came in and replaced Dan in them, and she blushed as it was him that held her in the cold nights. She was shocked that she didn't feel guilty for thinking of him in such a way compared to her past lover, but she put it down to how much alike they were. She stopped with Naruto as he looked at a sign and turned to the left off the road to Konoha and onto the other smaller one. "Where are you going, Gaki?" "Konoha is that way," said Jiraiya. "We will be there in one more day. We may as well rest up and shower. I don't think they will welcome us with warm arms the way you smell, Jiraiya." The women chuckled as the man scowled and muttered something about smart-ass brats and followed him. They booked 2 rooms, one for the women and the other for him and Jiraiya. Naruto left and went to the hot spring, where he removed his clothes and put them on the bench and pulled a towel around him. He let his bugs out from his body and they flew off into the air and over the wall. He groaned as he slid into the water. It burned against his skin soothingly as he relaxed. He heard the door slide open and he looked over and saw Tsunade walk in with a towel around her. Now, had he been any other straight man, he would have died from blood loss, but being a Aburame and controlling his emotions, he managed only a small nosebleed, which she saw and blushed slightly. "Mind if I join you?" she asked shyly. He raised an eyebrow and gestured her to join him. "You do not need to ask. This is a co-ed hot spring," he said as she slid into the water in front of him. "Yes, I know, but I wanted to be polite and make sure I wasn't disturbing you," she answered. "Thank you for that, but I do not mind," although my mind had preoccupied with what is going to happen when I return. "What do you mean?" she asked curiously. "You do not know? I was certain that Jiraiya would have told you. After all, you will be doing the ceremony." Her eyes widened. "Ceremony? You're getting married?" He nodded. "Yes, I am marrying the Kazekage's daughter Temari." He saw her look down. "Oh," she said quietly. "If it makes you feel better, it is an arranged marriage." She looked up. "Why would that make me feel better?" He gave her a look that made her smile slightly. "You do not think I am not aware of your feelings for me?" She blushed slightly. "And yes, I do have feelings for you, but aside from that, I'm getting married. You're the soon-to-be god, and the village would accept you in a relationship with me. Fuck the council and the village," she shouted, then blushed at her outburst. She saw him with a raised eyebrow above his glasses. "I did not know you felt so strongly. However, the one way we could be together is if the clan resurrection law is passed for my clan," he said. "Of course, then you could marry up to 5 women, but the council would select them and have you get them pregnant and take the children when they're born. Trust me, I know how they think. I have the backing of my clan. They have already threatened to leave the village for me, and I dare say they would help me again, as well as a few other clans I am friendly with. I do believe if I do use the law, I will have numerous offers from the clans to marry their daughters, but there are only 2 I would accept if they came." She looked interested. "Do tell," she said mischievously. They sat in the water for an hour with him telling her of his friends in the clans he was on good terms with. Jiraiya hung at the back of the group, limping badly and hanging his head. He had tried to peep on Tsunade, but it had gone terribly wrong. Naruto was with her and he seemed fine, but he hadn't realized that his bugs were patrolling around the place just for him. Of course, the minute he moved, Tsunade and Naruto had hurt him and he didn't have a pleasant time, to say the least. His chakra being constantly drained meant he couldn't escape from her wrath, and he had suffered. He cursed blondes and the Aburames under his breath, which earned him an angry buzz from the bugs and Naruto, making him flinch away from possible pain. He cheered when he saw the gates of Konoha in front of them and ran off away from them happily. "He is going to the hot springs, isn't he?" asked Tsunade. Naruto nodded. "Indeed he is. He thinks he won't get as badly beaten if we aren't there, but he shall learn." He chuckled. He drew some blood and pushed his palm into the ground, which summoned a small black bug that could fit in his hand. They heard it buzz happily and his bug spoke for him. They watched shocked as it became a deep red and flew off into the air towards the hot springs. Both women looked at him in confusion. "What was that for?" asked Shizune. "That was one of the more powerful illusionist bugs I know. They are similar to genjutsu users, but the illusion can't be dispelled except by killing it. Also, it is a female, and like all females, do not like perverts," he stated. "What will it do?" "It will cast an illusion to make him think he is peeking in the men's side, and whenever he tries to look in the other, he will see them as well. It is cast upon him, so it should last a good while." The women were laughing while he smirked slightly, walking up the gate. In the same day she entered the village. She was publicly named as God Diamond after a large drinking session between herself, Naruto, Jiraiya and Shizune, who joined, and they all left the bar with Tsunade kissing Naruto passionately in the street before staggering off with Shizune. The next morning was not a good one for Naruto. First, he had a huge hangover which would not go away no matter what he tried. Resigning himself, he dresses and left for the cage tower to meet up with his team for some missions. He needed some sort of release from the pain. When he tried to get into the tower, he was stopped by some cocky jounin telling him the goddamn was busy and wouldn't want to see him anyway. They were admitted into the hospital several minutes later with chakra burns all over their body, and the secretary seemed particularly nasty today as she stopped him entering, insisting she was working. With a hard look, she shrank back and he strode into the room, closing the door behind him with a loud slam. It was loud enough to make Tsunade jump onto her desk and then fall off right into his arms. She had her face buried into his chest as his arms held her. "Morning, Naru-kun, how are you?" she mumbled out through his jacket. This was the point where Team 10 came in and Tenten fainted at seeing her idol in the arms of her much-liked teammate. Neji was wide-eyed, then started to chuckle as Guy and Lee began ranting about restored youthfulness. Naruto helped her up and turned to the crying pair with a small smile. "Hey there guys, could you be quieter? I have a killer hangover from last night." He gave a small glance over to the woman who blushed slightly. He saw Guy stop and look at him. "You were drinking? No, your flames of youth have fallen. We must rekindle them before you lose them forever." He cheered, striking the good guy pose along with Lee. "Guys, I am not in the mood for youthfulness this morning." He gave a small pleasured sigh as Tsunade held her glowing hand up to his temple. "Thanks, Su-chan, that was killing me." He smiled at her. She walked back round her desk and sat down and looked at the team, except for Tenten, who was still unconscious. "I suppose you want a mission?" Guy nodded. "Yosh, we need to improve our youthfulness to combat the forces of the dark." He cheered again. The few sane people in the room looked at him questioningly. He coughed. "Can we have a mission now?" She nodded and handed them a B-rank mission. Seeing their confused expressions, she explained, "Now that you have a Chunin in your squad, you get higher missions. Oh, and Hyuga Neji, under recognition of several council members and teammates, you have also been promoted to Chunin along with Aburame Shino and Narashikamaru." He was shocked as she handed him the jacket. "Wait, did you say teammates?" She nodded at him. "Yes, Naruto recommended you get the promotion as well as Hiyashi. Now if you could leave, I have some work to do." They bowed and left her alone. They could have sworn they heard some muttered curses as they closed the door. Neji turned on Naruto. "Why didn't you tell me you recommended me?" he demanded. "I wanted to see you shocked," he said simply, and walked off with his team watching after him before following. Guy carrying Tenten over his shoulder. All was the same in Team 10 for a week until Naruto was left behind when they went on a mission without him by orders of the Hokage. He stood in front of the council stoic and unmoving. "Uzumaki Naruto, we believe it is time for you to pass on your bloodlines, and so you will have to impregnate women." It was here that Naruto interjected. "Impregnate? You make it sound like it will be against their will," he stated coldly. Many people shivered slightly. "For the most part it is. We have arranged a marriage between you and the daughter of the Raikage." Naruto was glaring at the smirking Homura. The damn woman thought she could command him to marry someone? He was going to marry for love and nothing less. However, from the looks on the civilians' faces, he knew there was probably nothing he could do. "Why the hell wasn't I informed of this?" asked Tsunade angrily. The decision was made after the Sandaime was wounded and was not fit for his position any longer. It was made by the council and so took effect without Akage's intervening. One of the council said, smirking at him, "She will arrive with the Raikage in 2 days, so I suggest you prepare for the visit Uzumaki." Naruto scowled and glared at the man, but he couldn't tell and simply walked out of the room, and shortly after there was a roar of fury as the guard was sent through the door and onto the desk in the middle of the room. "That goddamn council. A second arranged marriage, and both are Akage's daughter as well. This damn village really wants to be powerful, doesn't it?" He didn't even hear Tamari shouting at him from down the street and didn't acknowledge her until he felt her hand on his shoulder. He wheeled round quickly, knocking her over in the process, but he caught her round the waist. They stood like that for a few minutes before he pulled her up so their bodies were flush against each other. They stared at each other before she gently pushed away from him to stand by herself. She wrapped her arms around her chest almost as if she was cold. He could feel the nervous aura she was giving out. "If there is something on your mind, just ask. I won't get mad or anything," he said kindly to her with a smile. She gave a small one back. "It's about this marriage." He saw her look down. "I just want to know why you accepted it. Is it because you like me or because you were forced into it?" He regarded her for a moment. "Honestly, it is both." He saw her look up. "Had I have known you a little better, I may have asked you out. But the reason I accepted the marriage was because of what it would do for our villages. Not to say I don't like you, but you were a little more than aggressive to my teammate. I know, I have apologized to her for it and we are friends now." "And what of your brother?" The Sandaime placed another seal on top to suppress the demon. "All that was affected negatively was his control over the sand, but he can sleep now, so it worked out," she said quietly at the end. "Good, he is what gives Jinchuriki a bad name. What do you think of this marriage?" She smiled. "I don't mind too much. I was a bit pissed at first, but after he explained to me I felt better about it. And the fact it's you I'm marrying helped. If it had have been anyone else I would have refused indefinitely." She blushed slightly after saying it. "Oh, would you have?" "I feel startled by that now," he grinned at her, "but there is a stipulation to our marriage now with the introduction with the law because of my bloodlines." "What is it?" "It's not like you have to marry more women?" She joked, but he didn't laugh. "You can't be serious?" He nodded. "I am very serious. Due to my bloodlines being in my DNA, any of my children would have all of my bloodlines as well as maximum chakra reserves from me and healing qualities. In essence, the perfect soldier." He cursed the council for putting him in this position. "Have they chosen them for you?" she asked. "So far only one that I'm aware of, the Raikage's daughter. Other than that I don't know any more." "The Raikage's daughter? They really want to get more favor by marrying you with two daughters of Kages. They are power-hungry fools, and if I guess right they shall attempt to raise any children born to be powerful in Danzo's root." "What's that?" she questioned. "A branch of Anbu that are only loyal to Danzo and move behind the scenes gathering information and killing off people who get in the way of his plans. However, we cannot prove this, and so he continues, but with more security than before," he explained to her. "You don't think they would actually try to kidnap our children, do you?" she said fearfully. He raised an eyebrow at the "our children" part but ignored it. "I think they would, but we can plan closer to the time what to do about it. For now let's not worry too much and get something to eat." He eyed her as her stomach growled. She laughed. "Sounds like a good idea." They walked off to a nearby barbecue place for their lunch. Later that night, Naruto finds himself walking into Hana's work, which was the Inuzuka Veterinary Center. He stood in the reception waiting for her to come out and see him. This was on the minute thinking. He had forgotten he owed her a date and so went shopping and picked up a dress he thought she might like and hoped it would fit her as well. After all, he didn't want to offend her by getting a dress that was too big. She might take that to mean he thought she was fat. He had a basket in the other hand which contained the food and blanket for them to sit on at the place he had planned for them to go to. He was getting bored and took a glance past the desk and saw her walk through a doorway into another room opposite. He walked up the room and took a look in and saw her sat down over a desk looking at some papers in her hand. He stepped out in front of her and she gasped and nearly fell out of her chair in shock. "What are you doing here? You frightened me." He held up the basket. "Sorry for scaring you, but I planned on taking you out for the date now." Her face brightened and she gave a small squeal. "But I don't have anything to wear." "This stuff smells," she said. "Don't worry, I thought as much and got you this." He handed her the package and she took out the dress with wide eyes. It was made of a soft silk and like material that was black and then red stitched vines going up one side that spread out over the rest of the dress. It was modest enough. He had probably had to guess her size, but it looked like it would fit. "Thanks, give me a minute and I'll get changed." She all but ran out of the room into what he guessed as a bathroom. He took her seat and looked over the desk. It was messy and disorganized, notes and forms lying everywhere, but he couldn't blame her for it. This was a needed business for Konoha because of the Inuzukas and Aburame clan. Both were the village's greatest trackers and were needed. He certainly hoped she wouldn't be too shy about the dress. It had been in his price range, but it was nice enough if not a little revealing when the girl put it on for him to look at. He shook his head. Hopefully if people saw him with her they would stop with catching his attention. He heard the door open and a small cough from it, and he looked up with a smile which immediately became a large gaping mouth as he took her in. The dress hugged the curves of her body perfectly, although he couldn't help but notice that it seemed a little strained around the chest area, and she had let her hair out and apparently brushed it as it flowed down past her shoulders, framing her face majestically. He had always known she was beautiful, and this was only a reminder to that thought. She walked up to him and gently pressed her body into him. "Do you like it, Naruto-kun?" she asked teasingly. "I don't think you've ever looked so beautiful, Hana-chan." She blushed gently and kissed him on the lips. "Thank you. Shall we go?" He nodded and took her arm and they left with her locking up behind her. She was unsure where they were going. They had passed all the good restaurants in the village and were heading into the forest. "Where are we going?" He smiled. "You'll see soon enough, it's just up ahead." They stepped out into the clearing and her breath left her as she looked around. There was a large waterfall that stood out sharply, and all around it were flowers of different colors, and in the cliff face there were minerals that reflected the sun's last rays into the water. She turned to him with almost teary eyes. "Naruto-kun, it's beautiful," she whispered. "I thought so as well. This is where my father would bring me when I was first communicating with my hive, and your mother brought me here as well not too long ago." She looked interested. What did she want? A grin made its way across her face. "No grandchildren until she's older. She said she was too young for them." Hana started laughing. "That's exactly what I did. I ended up in the Hokage monument face first." Hana stopped laughing to see a small pout on his face that made her laugh so hard she was crying. Naruto glared at her half-heartedly. waiting for her to finish. When she gathered herself, he proceeded to set out a blanket and place all the food he had brought on it. He saw her staring hungrily at it and he gestured her to it. "Go ahead, it was made for us to eat anyway." She smiled and tore into the meat, first using the obvious culinary skills from her clan. He watched amusedly, eating at a more sedate pace, watching as she devoured her food in seconds. She licked her lips delightedly and sighed. "That was so nice. Where did you get it?" "I made it with some help from Ino. She's quite the cook." "I'm surprised she's a ninja though. I didn't think her parents would allow their princess to become one." He pondered on that and saw a scowl on Hana's face. "I have nothing against women becoming ninja, it's just in her case it was a surprise, and with Sakura as well." A smile came across her face again. "It's okay. Nowadays women become ninja for all the wrong reasons, like them chasing after the Uchiha kid and Hinata after you." Naruto blinked at her. "Care to expand on that?" She looked back at him. "You can't say you didn't notice? I mean, it's plainly obvious to everyone, except you apparently. I rarely see the girl, maybe once or twice when I go to see Neji, which may I add isn't very often as Hiyashi won't let me in. Although now that I think of it, I have been followed by someone lately, but I don't know who. They're able to hide from my bugs. It's definitely her then. She's on the same team as your brother, so she would have to learn how to hide from the bugs." He nodded. "I suppose. While on the topic of other girls, I take it you are aware of my marriage?" She nodded sadly. "Well, that's changed because of the damned council. I reinstated the clan resurrection laws. Seeing as I have several bloodlines, they created me my own clan, and with it I am a clan head and need several wives." Her head shot up. "How many wives do you need exactly?" He didn't answer for a minute. 6. "You are aware that's any man's dream? Why do you sound so down about it?" "I wanted to marry out of love, but the council has been choosing my wives, for instance the daughter of the Raikage and of course they are to marry, and once clans discover this I'll be buried in requests. I dare say Mom will get in on it. She's been trying to get me out of the house for ages now by setting me up with men, but after she suggested Guy I'd had enough." She looked over to see Naruto shaking. "Are you okay, Naruto-kun?" Suddenly he started to laugh and fall over onto his back, still laughing raucously. "And what's so funny?" she demanded with a small glare crossing her perfect features as she stared down at him. "Your mom tried to set you up with Guy," he said through all the laughs. She scowled at him and pouted. "It's not like I actually went out with him, you know," she suggested it. "But now I think she was messing with my head." She entered a thoughtful pose. Naruto soon stopped laughing and sat up, breathing heavily, trying to calm down. He saw her expression, and with the moon casting its glow down upon her he could only see her as an angel, looking back to him after thinking she saw him staring intently at her, and she blushed slightly but stared back. "What are you looking at, Naruto-kun?" she said quietly. "I'm not sure. I see an angel before me, but I know she's not. I see a princess before me, Hana-chan, and she is the one I want to know better." During his small speech, Hana had filled with emotion she had never felt before and had closed the gap between them and kissed him, trying to show him what he had done to her. His hands rose up to her sides and her pressing onto his body pushed him onto his back as she lay on top of him, her hands moving through his hair as he held her close to him. She couldn't believe the emotion he had made surface in her. It was like he called it up for her to experience, and she hoped it would stay with her forever, that he would stay with her forever. Tsume was slowly becoming worried about her daughter. She would never come home late without sending a message ahead, unlike her brother. She tapped her fingers on the marble-top table nervously, hoping nothing had happened to her. What would she do if something had? She didn't know. The creak of the front door opening startled her and snapped her from her thoughts. She rushed to the hallway and saw her perfectly fine, and wrapped her up in a tight hug. "Hana, where were you? I was so worried." Not getting an answer, she let go of her to look at her and saw her eyes clouded with contentment and a true smile on her face. It was then where Tsume noticed the clothes she was wearing. Sniffing her, she found Naruto's scent all over her. "Were you with Naruto?" She heard Hana's heartbeat increase with the mention of his name and her breathing quickened slightly. She nodded slowly and then hugged her mother back, squeezing her tightly. "Oh Mom, it was wonderful. He took me to a waterfall out in the forest and he bought me this dress to wear because I was working when he came round to get me from work, and he called me a princess. He was so romantic. You should have heard all the things he said to me." She finished with a loud sigh of contentment and happiness. As happy as Tsume was, she knew about his arranged marriages and knew she had to tell her. "Hana, you do know that he is engaged to 2 women already?" She felt her nod. "I knew already, and he told me about them again tonight. He has the clan resurrection law in place as well." Tsume's eyes were wide. She hadn't known about this, but now the two could be together. "Mom, will you put in the request for him to marry me?" Almost immediately Tsume fainted. Hana snapped out of her trance and started to shake her mother to wake her. Naruto woke the next day with a great feeling inside him. He was brimming with happiness, and as he left the compound later on, everyone he talked to noticed it. It was hard not to. It's not very often that you see an Aburame smiling. When he came into sight of the Hokage Tower, he suddenly remembered that this was the day where his second fiancée was arriving in Konoha, the daughter of the Raikage. This dampened his mood, but he still held on to the smile, but it was a little less inviting. He entered Tsunade's office and found once again she was asleep at her desk. With a small sigh he walked over beside her and bent down to kiss her gently on the lips. He felt her moan quietly and push back against his pressure, and before he knew it she was wide awake and they were passionately kissing. It was him that broke it, and she groaned in displeasure when he did so. She glared at him while he gave her a cheeky smile. "You know I'm going to punish you for doing that to me." "Doing what, Su-chan?" "I have no idea as to what you speak of," he replied innocently. "For waking me up early and then leaving me hanging after. I wasn't done with you. This is the day that the Raikage comes with his daughter, and my team is once again going to be without me because of it. I was wondering if you could get someone to train me." "What's wrong with Jiraiya? Couldn't he do it?" she asked, confused. "He's still a little angry at me after the whole hot spring incident, so I'm staying away from him." "And what about Shibi or your bloodlines?" "Father has some business with the companies that buy our silk, and my bloodlines have taught me enough already. I need to branch out away from my specialities." She looked thoughtful for a moment but was then interrupted by a voice. A body soon appeared to go with the voice. "What was that, Tenzo?" "I said I will teach him. But your techniques come from your affinities, which I don't know if Naruto-kun has. There is a simple test, Tsunade-sama." He reached into his pouch and pulled out a small seed and he handed it to Naruto, who looked at it for a moment then back at Tenzo. "What do I do now?" "Channel as much chakra into it as possible." Before Tsunade could stop him, there was an explosion of green and brown which filled the office and then smashed through the windows and trailed down over the front of the tower. Naruto stood in the middle of it, a small patch of clear ground around him, while the other two were buried in it. He heard muffled shouts from where Tsunade had been, and as he reached to pull the vines away, they shook and then slowly parted to allow his hand through. He felt her hand grasp this tightly, making him wince, and he pulled, dragging her out of the plants and on top of him as she tried to jump him. The moment Tenzo had felt the seed react, he had blended into the floor to avoid what had happened to Tsunade, and he rose out of it through several thicker vines to see Naruto on the ground with Tsunade on top of him. He raised an eyebrow behind his mask at the way they were, and they still hadn't moved from their position. He then heard her moan and he could guess what they were doing. Leaving a small note to Naruto, he left as silently as he appeared. After their passionate moment, they stood up and fixed their clothes. Tsunade looked around her office gleefully and then grinned at Naruto, pulling him into another kiss. "You saved me from paperwork," she exclaimed happily. "It'll take ages to get this stuff out, so I can relax now." Naruto couldn't help but chuckle at the way she was acting. It reminded him of a little kid who got a new toy. He then looked around for Tenzo, who had disappeared, but instead he saw a small piece of paper stuck on one of the thorns near his head. He pulled it off and read it. "When you are done, come to Training Ground 7. I believe there is a bridge there you know well." Tsunade looked thoughtful for a moment as she read the note herself. "That's where Team 7 trains. I wonder why he wants you to go there. Probably because of all the trees and the water nearby, so if I mess up he can fix it easily enough, I suppose. But what does he mean, no?" The rest of her sentence was muffled as Naruto's lips found hers again and she happily returned the gesture. Tenzo was becoming only slightly impatient. After all, an outstanding ninja like he is a firm believer of punctuality, unlike a certain copy ninja nearby. The said ninja suddenly sneezed and looked around quickly before shaking his head and watching for his team again. He was finally rewarded with the appearance of Naruto, but he noted the messed up hair and askew glasses with some curiosity. "I was asking you to arrive as soon as possible, not when you felt like it." He saw Naruto smile. "Yes, but Tsunade had to talk to me about something." "Yes, I saw that. She's not too old for you?" Naruto shrugged. "I love her for who she is, not what she looks like." It was Tenzo's turn to smile. "Good words. I see I was right in choosing to train you. How long will you be here for?" His temporary student looked up at the sun unblinkingly. "For at least 4 or so hours. Can you teach me anything in that time?" Tenzo hid a grin. "Yeah, it's simple, not even a technique really, but handy if you're short of money." Naruto was really astounded at the simplicity it took to control the techniques at all. Chakra was the main thing to them, and that was something that Naruto had an abundance of. Tenzo was rather proud of himself at the moment. He finally had someone to pass the techniques he knew down to. He didn't think anyone would be capable of them, but this kid seemed to be made to control every element as well as every bloodline. He idly wondered what he would be like in the future. The Hokage? Easy for someone of his strength. Even Anbu seemed below his skills, but Naruto was severely lacking in one key aspect of being a shinobi, even with all the bloodlines he had. Stealth. It seemed to be the one thing Naruto just couldn't learn. His chakra signature was massive even when masked, and he was just a little clumsy. Tenzo aimed to correct this. His body shivered as he imagined who he would have to ask. But for now Naruto would stick with explosive missions that required lots of power, he supposed. He certainly had enough of it blowing around. He left the forest and emerged right at the edge of Team 7's training ground. He saw Kakashi have what he thought was a look of shock on his visible face before smiling. That smile fell immediately as Naruto walked out behind him to stand on his right. He could almost feel the anger coming from Kakashi while Sasuke glared at Naruto. Naruto, taking enough of this, bid farewell to Tenzo and disappeared in a swarm of bugs to the Hokage Tower. Kakashi walked over to Tenzo while Sasuke followed, obviously wanting to know who he was. "Why the hell were you training him, Minato?" His cover name being used to hide his identity. "I offered to because his other teachers were busy. And that he has my abilities." Kakashi looked furious. "I demand that you teach Sasuke your techniques. I feel no need to do as you say. You left Anbu, and when you did your authority stayed within it. Now if you will excuse me, I have a mission to be heading to." He walked past Kakashi and the glaring Sasuke, leaving them as well as their teammates who were confused as to what had just happened. Naruto was standing in front of the desk where Tsunade was sitting, giving the occasional glance up at him while he stood perfectly still. "Do you know how much longer they may be, Tsuchan?" He suddenly spoke and she shook her head. "No, Wolf told me they were spotted at the west gate nearly half an hour ago, but they still haven't." She was interrupted by a knock at the door. "Probably them now, Naruto-kun. Come in." The door swung open and it revealed Tsunade's counterpart from Kumo. He walked in and was followed closely by women probably the same age as Naruto. She snapped her head up and looked around frantically before her eyes settled on Naruto, who was hit by a wave of hormones. Naruto took a step back, breathing heavily, and tried to calm himself, but she launched at him, sending both to the floor with a loud crash. She tried to kiss him with almost maniacal desperation as Naruto turned his head away. Her claw-like fingers sliced through the mesh shirt he was wearing and left shallow cuts along his chest. She rubbed his chest, still trying to kiss him, when she was lifted into the air by someone who was both powerful and jealous. Tsunade's eyes met with Yugito's and they stared at each other as Naruto picked himself up and tried his best to cover his chest, but what he noticed most of all was that the wounds she had given him weren't healing. They weren't serious by any means, but they stung slightly. "Mind telling me what you were trying to do to him?" Tsunade shouted at the cat-like girl. Her long dirty blonde hair hung down her back and the yellow-slitted eyes looked into Tsunade's, trying to make her back down. Unfortunately, this was Tsunade and she was not someone who could be intimidated easily. "Yugito, come back by my side," the Raikage said sharply. Tsunade sat her down and saw her glance over at Naruto before complying with her order. She walked round her desk and sat down, but not without a warning glare at Yugito, who was fidgeting but not out of fear, but she was staring at Naruto and Tsunade saw the lust in her eyes. "Raikage-sama, could you please guarantee that your daughter does not jump on Naruto-kun again? I would hate for him to lose a wife so easily." The man chuckled. "So you're in there too, eh? Don't worry, she won't disobey me, although I doubt it'll be much use if we try to stop her. If she wants something she usually gets it in the end." Almost as if to prove the point, Yugito purred while still staring at Naruto, who was beginning to get uncomfortable with her looks. It reminded him slightly of the Examiner, but much more potent, and the hormones he had been hit with were powerful, but he had managed to control himself, barely. He knew she had a demon like he had, but wasn't sure of which one it was. Chances were for him it was lust-filled cat. He chuckled in his head. "I'm sure you know that she has a demon sealed into her like him there." "Not quite, it has been destroyed." The man looked at Tsunade as if she was crazy. "You can't just destroy a tailed beast. You would have to remove all of its chakra, then each tail, before killing it for it to be destroyed." "That is exactly what happened, Kage-sama. My bloodlines did exactly what you just said. It lasted nearly 3 days, but they were successful in the end." "Is this one of those you better sit down, it's a long story situations?" Naruto smiled and Yugito purred again. "You have a way with words, Raikage-sama. You better be able to use your tongue too." Yugito purred at him lustfully. Naruto caught on to this immediately and stared at her. She fidgeted even more under his gaze. "You'll see soon enough, I guess." Tsunade watched the exchange with some amusement, but idly wondered if he could use his tongue as well as he could when kissing. A blush appeared on her face as she looked at him. The Raikage coughed lightly, drawing everyone's attention to him. "If you two could stop the flirting and Tsunade clears her thoughts, we can begin." Naruto sat down in one of the 3 chairs and Yugito scrambled for the one beside him, leaving him with the last one on the left. He sighed as he sat down and glanced over at his daughter, who was currently trying to restrain herself from jumping on him again. This could and would most likely be a disaster. Shizune heard screams of irritation come from her master's office, and then the Raikage opened the door and hurriedly walked off down the corridor. "You may be engaged to him, but that doesn't mean you have him yet." The girl that had gone in with him in the first place walked out, licking her lips happily and grinning. "See you later, Naruto-kun," she purred and stalked off down the corridor after her father. Shizune picked up some of the papers from her desk and walked into the office where she saw Tsunade healing Naruto's chest from numerous scratches he had running down his torso. She then saw his bruised lips and the furious glare on her master's face. "Why did you let her do that?" Tsunade demanded. "Her hormones sort of disoriented me. I didn't know what I was doing." "I think it was her demon though," Shizune, deciding not to question what they were talking about, offered to help. He shook his head. "It's fine, Shizune. The only thing that suffered here was my trousers." As she was about to ask, he turned round and she saw the reddened cheeks of his bare ass and the tattered cloth from where Yugito had ripped it off. She blushed as she rushed out of the office and he disappeared in a cloud of smoke. Shibi heard the resounding signal that someone had entered the house via sunshine and went upstairs to see his son holding a pair of trousers and opening the bathroom door. "You met your second fiancée?" he asked in a monotone. "Yes, father, she is very different to the rest." "So she is a Jinchuriki?" "Among other things." "Explain." "A younger version of mother. From what you have told me." Naruto saw Shibi stiffen and pale. He walked up and put his hand onto his son's shoulder. "Good luck," and with that left. Naruto took this to be a bad sign, a very bad sign. Naruto took the next few days as a gift. Yugito hadn't seen him lately and his training with Tenzo continued, but he had to admit some of the techniques were a bit lame. He could see they were useful, but why did he need a house? He sighed after a brief demonstration from his teacher. "What's wrong, Naruto? Don't you think that these techniques are all a little tame for a shinobi?" Obviously this was the wrong thing to say as Tenzo turned to him, his eyes widened in some sort of glare. Whatever it was, Naruto was a little bit frightened by it. "Naruto, Makuten is about finesse. Plants aren't supposed to be used in wars of battles, they are there for food and to make our lives easier," he explained. "I understand that, but can't you use them to confuse or just hold your opponent without using them to attack?" "They can be used like that, but you need a source to grow the plants from. You carry a huge bag of seeds with you." "I think that's enough," Tenzo coughed. "Yes, well, I do use them to restrain enemies, but only if they are being a nuisance." "A nuisance being someone who won't get knocked out?" Tenzo smiled. "Exactly. Now have you been practicing with that technique I showed you yesterday?" A couple of hours later, when Tenzo was low on chakra, they decided to end the training there. Naruto helped his teacher out of the forest where he heard a familiar voice. "Naruto-kun, why have you been avoiding me?" Yugito-kun, her eyes fixed on him. Tenzo didn't know who she was, but from the way Naruto was shaking he was frightened of her. "Yugito-chan, I've been training a lot lately and haven't found the time to see you." Tenzo knew he was lying through his teeth. He had also worked out who this woman was. He grinned. "Well, Naruto, you've got time now. Our training is finished. But I have to make sure you get home, sensei." "No, it's quite all right. I can get home fine. He's all yours, Yugito." With that she pounced at him, successfully stopping him from escaping back into the forest, and dragged him away, leaving Tenzo laughing at his student. "You'll thank me someday, Naruto." He was in a bad situation, one that he had never been in before except for those moments at the office. He was pinned by Yugito down onto her bed and was kissing him, albeit with a lot less force than last time. Her hormones were just as bad, however, and he was struggling to keep himself under control. But between the kissing, hormones, and the grinding of her body onto his, it was a wasted effort on his behalf. She looked at him smiling and he was taken aback by how calm it was. None of the lust-filled stares or mental undressing. She seemed happy almost. But all of a sudden her smile disappeared and was replaced with a forlorn, regret look, and she got off him and sat on the edge of her bed. Naruto was completely confused. First she all but abducted him and now was sad about it. He heard sobs coming from her and he sat up to see her body jerking as she cried. He reached over and put his hand on her shoulder, where she turned round and dove into his chest, effectively knocking the air out of his lungs. She cried into his chest, his clothes growing wet with her tears as she apologized. "I'm sorry, Naruto, I'm so sorry. I didn't want to, but my body completely took over and I tried to take you." He nervously put his hand on her back and rubbed it. Her tears soon stopped and her sobs silent and was replaced with a gentle purr which he could feel vibrating up his chest. When he stopped he heard her whine and look up at him pouting. Naruto saw just how cute and beautiful she was in those few moments, and using his own hormone sat up, making her squeal, and captured her lips with his own. She purred as his hands rubbed her back again, and she ran her hands through the length of his hair and massaged his scalp. This was all to like him and Tsunade when they were alone, but never gone past this point. Her hands left his hair and ran down over his chest, her nails slicing though the mesh again, leaving shallow scratches in his skin. She pushed off the heavy trench coat from his shoulders and he moved his arms to allow it to fall behind him, and the ripped shirt went with it, leaving him topless. He pushed her down onto the bed and ran his hands up her sides to the hem of the top she was wearing and pulled it up until it was below her breasts. Her hands replaced his and she pulled it off over her head and dropped it on the floor beside the bed. She moved them to his waist and her hands blindly fumbled with his trousers as she tried to undo them with increasing frustration until a ripping sound was heard and she pushed them down as far as she could reach and he kicked them off. Now she could feel him pressing against her crotch and she purred to him as his lips moved down to her neck and then trailed down over her breasts and stomach. She repressed a shiver as his fingers hooked into the waist of her trousers and pulled them down, revealing her in all her glory. He threw them onto the floor with the rest of the clothes and was tackled back onto the bed with her on top, grinning at him. They kissed again as her hands trailed down over his muscled chest into his boxers where her hand disappeared inside. Naruto gave a moan as she pumped him. She sat up and with her free hand pulled down his boxers so he was as naked as she was. She gave him a few more pumps before sliding up to him and lining herself with him. She felt his hands on her hips and looked to his face where she stared into his eyes. The mixture of red and black made him that much more mysterious and attractive. Yugito-chan. Are really sure. He let out a loud moan as she pushed down, his cock penetrating inside her as she cried out and whimpered. She hadn't done anyone with this sort of size. As she continued to slide down, her cries turned into a hiss as their hips met and she fell forwards onto his chest, breathing heavily. He took the initiative and kissed her gently on the lips and pushed upwards with his hips, making her gasp out in pleasure. She held his shoulders as she grinded her hips, causing Naruto to groan out and his grip on her hips to tighten. Her purse got louder as she got faster, and with a growl from Naruto, she was under him and he was thrusting into her. The sudden change of position caused pleasure to flow through her body and the thrust stimulated it further. Her arms shot up round his back as he got faster, her nails raking up and down his back to try and relieve some of the pleasure. He didn't even seem to notice as his thrusts became quicker and more powerful and her moans quickly neared screams. Her grip on him tightened and her legs wrapped round his waist, pushing him ever deeper inside of her as she screamed out, her orgasm knocking the breath from her and her walls squeezing Naruto almost painfully as he continued to thrust before crying out as he released in her. They remained in that position, breathing heavily as Naruto finally caught up with what just happened. Yugito-chan, we might have a problem, he breathed out, still catching his breath. She wasn't sure what he meant until she felt the warm trickle of his cum down her ass, but instead of freaking out like he thought she would, she smiled at him and kissed him. It's alright Naruto-kun, it was going to happen someday. It's one of the stipulations for our marriage. Naruto smiled back, although sadly. You do know you're not going to be able to do missions now for nearly a year. The smile on her face fell. Please tell me you're joking, she pleaded. He shook his head. Su-chan won't let anyone who's pregnant go on extended missions or any out of the village, so you are stuck with D-rank missions. She looked as if she was going to cry, but Naruto smiled. Do you want me to cheer you up? She nodded. How are you going to do that? She let out a loud gasp as he thrusted into her and she grinned at him. I feel better already, and she giggled cutely as he kissed her nose. Nagi was standing outside his daughter's room waiting for her to come out. They had a meeting with the Hokage soon and if she didn't hurry up they would be late. He was getting agitated with each passing minute. Yugito, open this door, he demanded, knocking on it loudly. He heard a loud squeal and then her voice. Hold on father, I'm putting some clothes on. Open the door, he demanded again, determined to find out what was wrong. I'm not clothed, she shouted back through the door. Having enough of this, he kicked the door, slamming it open. What is taking you so? His eyes fell upon Naruto, who was asleep on his back in his daughter's bed, and from what he could tell he was naked. He rounded on the sheepish-looking Yugito, who was fully clothed and was holding Naruto's clothes in her arms. Do I want to know? He asked exasperatedly. She blushed in reply, and then Naruto gave a groan and rolled onto his front, still asleep. Nagi's eyes widened at the scratches and marks all over his back and turned to Yugito again, who looked horrified that her father had seen what she had done to him. Don't you think that's a little overkill, Yugito? She scowled at him. What I do to him is between me and him, now get out, you old lecher, she shouted while throwing him out into the corridor on his ass and slamming the door closed. I guess that means I'm by myself then. He stood up and fixed his robes before leaving for the Hokage tower. What did they do? Asked Tsunade, clearly trying to remain calm but was barely suppressing her anger. Nagi sat in front of her ready to bolt for it if she tried to blame him for it. I know for a fact that they were together last night. He tensed, ready to run when she sat back in her chair, clearly disappointed. Damn, I thought I could get him first, she muttered, then blushed realizing he had hurt her. He chuckled. You could get your own back on her, you know. With a raised eyebrow she leaned forwards again. And how would I achieve that? She questioned. You could make Naruto work along with Shizune for you. That way she will barely get to see him for a while and you can have him all day. He saw the smirk on her face. I like it. You're quite a trickster, Nagi. Why thank you, he smiled. A knock at the door was heard and it opened to show both Yugito and Naruto, who was trying not to look at Tsunade. Good morning, Tsunade-sama. Yugito bowed to her and Naruto simply stood beside her. For you perhaps, Your father just informed me of what happened between you two." In a flash, Nagi was clutching his head after being hit by Yugito. "Damn you, old man. Can't you keep anything to yourself?" she shouted at him while he whimpered. During this, Naruto had moved beside Tsunade and was trying to apologize to her. "I'm sorry, Su-chan, but hers as well as my own hormones made me react, and I want to apologize by taking you out tonight." He was answered by Tsunade grabbing the back of his head and kissing him. She released him and winked. "I wasn't going to punish you, but I was a little sad I wasn't your first Naruto-kun." She pouted and Naruto chuckled before schooling his features. "Could you check Yugito-chan for, He whispered so her father wouldn't hear. "You don't really think?" she asked back, whispering as well. "We just want to be sure. Between both of us being exceptionally healthy and having demonic influences on our bodies, we really don't know." She nodded, and he stood up straight again beside her and nodded to Yugito. "Thank you, Nagi, for coming by. You can leave the village anytime you want." "Thank you, Tsunade. I will probably be leaving as soon as possible. However, I doubt that my paperwork had mysteriously disappeared." He scowled at the thought of paperwork and Tsunade mirrored it. He gave a small bow and left. She turned to Yugito. "So you want me to check if you're pregnant?" She got a nod in reply. "It is quite early, so even if I don't find anything, I might in a few more days." "I understand, Tsunade-sama," said woman sighed. "Very well, let's go to the hospital then." All of them remained silent for the trip. Naruto was deep in thought. Tsunade was wondering where he would take her and Yugito was holding her stomach wondering if it would be a boy or a girl. They walked in and Tsunade led them to an empty room. Naruto hesitated at the door. "I can wait outside if you want." Yugito had other plans as she dragged him and closed the door. "You're turning into my father, you wuss." She scowled and he remained silent. Tsunade led her behind a curtain and pulled it over to cover them, leaving Naruto on the other side. He heard the muttering of a jutsu and then silence. He leaned up against the wall in silent thought when the door opened quietly and Hana's head popped in and saw him. "Naruto-kun, what are you doing here?" she asked, walking in, and he began to sweat. "You see Hana-chan." Yugito however chose this time to express her joy. "Naruto-kun, Tsunade-sama says I'm pregnant." She pulled back the curtain absolutely beaming but saw Naruto, who looked positively frightened, and a shocked Hana. "Bad time?" Hana turned on Naruto, who tried to back away, but Hana held him tightly by the ear as he tried to escape. She twisted it and he fell onto his knees. "And what is this about?" she asked sweetly. "This is Yugito-chan, the Raikage's daughter." Hana gasped and released his, making him sigh in relief. "I'm sorry, Hana-chan, please forgive me." She really didn't know what to do. She could accept his apology and leave it at that or make him work for it. She grinned. "I guess I can forgive you, Naruto-kun." He smiled, "But only if you do something for me. Anything, just name it." "That I'm number 2. She saw him begin to sweat. "I've already claimed that position." Tsunade spoke up and Hana's face became one of anger and shock combined. "I guess he didn't tell you about me." Hana once again rounded on her boyfriend, who was whimpering pitifully on the floor. "Oh, you are in such trouble." His reply was a weak nod. Team Guy could hear screams coming from the hospital as they headed towards it. Lee had managed to hurt himself during their last mission. Of course, Guy was completely overreacting to the whole thing and was carrying his youthful student while Tenten and Neji walked along behind. Tenten had been feeling depressed lately. She had heard about Naruto marrying off to several women to spread bloodlines and couldn't help but feel down. It wasn't as if she could offer to marry him. She came from a small, almost extinct clan and they didn't have much to offer to him. She sighed to herself. Neji knew something was wrong and he could only surmise it was Naruto that was the problem. He too had heard about the arranged marriages and knew that Hiyashi was trying to get Hinata to marry him using his influence in the council, but he highly doubted Naruto would go through it. They were about to enter the hospital when they saw the Inuzuka Naruto trained with dragging said person behind her by the ear. "Getting her pregnant behind my back, then making me third. You're in such trouble, Naruto-kun, and I'll show what a pissed off mother can do." And he was whimpering behind her as they headed towards the Inuzuka compound. They were frozen by the fact Naruto was being beaten on by a girl, but Tenten was on the verge of tears when she heard he had gotten someone pregnant, which Hana was not happy about. The doors opened again and this time Tsunade and Yugito came out. "Excuse me, did you see Naruto-kun and a bitch go by?" Guy simply pointed in the direction and she nodded. "Thank you," and she rushed off to saw her future husband. Tsunade sighed, making them look at her. "Tsunade-sama, what was that all about?" Neji asked. "Naruto-kun got one of his fiancées pregnant and as you can guess Hana is not happy with it, but I'm sure he'll work it out. It appears as if Naruto-kun had been doing some very unyouthful activities, Guy-sensei." "Yosh, you are right, Lee. When you are healed we will go save Naruto-kun and then train until his flames of youth is restored." Both of them cheered and entered the hospital, leaving the three staring at them. What did Naruto mean by making Hana third? Tsunade looked sadly at Tenten. The order in which he sleeps with them. Tenten was a little shocked. Who's number 2? They saw her fidget and then blush. Me, she said quietly. Both teammates were shocked, Neji less than Tenten, seeing as he knew something was happening between the two. However, Tenten was taking this rather hard and she had tears in her eyes. Tsunade saw this and walked over to her and hugged the girl, who started to cry into her stomach. Neji felt a little out of place and tried not to look at them. Perhaps it would be best if we went inside, away from prying eyes, he suggested after seeing some people looking with curious eyes at the pair. Tsunade nodded and led the distraught girl inside while Neji headed after Naruto. He just knew that his teammate would need help. He just got that feeling. Naruto was being held before Tsume, who was a little worried by the look on her daughter's face. He must have done something, she thought, seeing the look of horror on his face as Hana held his ear. What's wrong, Hana? Did he do something? Do something? Oh, he has done something. She twisted his ear harder. He went and got the Raikage's daughter pregnant last night. Tsume was shocked that she was already pregnant. And this bothers you because I wanted to be his first, she shouted, and Naruto cried out as she nearly ripped his ear off. Well, why not be his second? She was trying to stop her from hurting him too much. Oh, he's already got a second, she said sarcastically. Isn't that right, Naruto-kun? He nodded fearfully. And that is Tsunade-sama, Hana stated to her mother, the Hokage. Tsume screamed at them. What the hell are you doing with the Hokage? I love her, he muttered. And the age gap doesn't matter to you? I love her for who she is, not what I see. He felt Hana's grip on his ear disappear and he looked up to see her staring at him with little hearts in her eyes. That's so romantic, she cried as she hugged him, squeezing him tightly. Tsume's sweat dropped at the drastic change of emotions from her daughter. I suppose you're happy now, dear? She asked. Hana nodded happily in reply while Naruto slowly was turning blue from the death grip she had on him. Tsume, seeing this, tried to help him. Naruto, she said with a grin. Do you want to marry my daughter? Hana immediately released him, allowing Naruto to regain his breath while she stared at her mother in shock. Why did you ask him that here? She shouted. Well, he was here and so were you. It was as good a time as any. She shrugged. They turned to Naruto, who was nodding and seemed to be trying to talk. Yes, he managed to sputter out and was quickly pulled into a deep kiss by Hana, not giving him a chance to get any more oxygen. Tsume rolled her eyes at her daughter's behavior. From murderous psychopath to loving wife in 2 seconds dead, the door then flew off its hinges to reveal a blonde-haired woman who looked a similar age to her daughter and a look of anger on her face which was directed at Hana. Give me back my husband, she shouted at her. Tsume was shocked yet again. One of his other wives was trying to get him back. She turned to her daughter, who was growling. You didn't, she asked her. Hana just continued to growl at the cat-like woman who hissed at her. He's not yours yet, you bitch. You're one to talk, hussy. They leapt at each other and started fighting in the hallway of her house, scratching each other, and the sound of ripping clothes reached her ears. Tsume looked down at Naruto, who was just standing up. Should we stop them? She questioned. It would be best if we let them get it out of their systems, he muttered, still finding it hard to talk. After all, they're going to be living together eventually and I would prefer them not be fighting over me, cause I know I'll be the one getting hurt in the middle of it. Tsume could only nod as she watched the pair rolling around the floor screaming at each other. Unfortunately, Neji chose this moment to enter the house and upon seeing the fighting pair so close to him tried to back away, only to be dragged into it by Hana. They seemed to tag team him as they attacked, with Neji trying to defend himself but failing miserably. He was thrown clear soon after and landed at the spectators' feet in a heap. Naruto helped him up and held him so he wouldn't fall over. You okay, Neji? He asked. Did anyone get the number of that truck? He muttered dizzily before he passed out. Tsunade was just finishing healing Lee's arm when the door opened and Naruto walked in holding Hana and Yugito over his shoulders, who were both unconscious after knocking each other out. He laid them down on beds and turned to Tsunade, who looked curious. Yugito-chan followed us to Hana's house and then they fought over me, he explained. She nodded and went over to heal the numerous wounds they had. Naruto saw Guy and Lee staring at him. What is it, Guy-sensei? He asked. We heard that you got one of your fiancées pregnant. If you're wondering, we intended it to happen. Guy smiled. That's good, I thought it had been by accident. Naruto looked around the hospital room. Where is Tenten? You should ask Tsunade-sama, she looked after her while we came in here. What happened to Neji? We were told he went after you. Yes, he did, and was quickly brought into their little fight. He's fine though, I sent a clone with him to take him back to the complex. He felt Tsunade's hand on his shoulder and he turned round. He saw the distress on her face. You need to talk to Tenten. She's feeling upset because of all these marriages, and with hearing that you have a child made her release it. Where is she? I left her in my office with Shizune. I'll take you. He shook his head. No, I need to do this by myself. He left the room and Tsunade returned to healing Lee while the two women started to insult each other in their sleep, making the other occupants' sweat drop. He took a deep breath as he opened the door. Sure enough, Tenten was lying on the small bed Tsunade had in her office and Shizune was in a chair beside her. She nodded to him and walked past and closed the door, giving them some privacy. He walked over to the bed and took Shizune's chair. Tenten knew it was him because she didn't turn to face him and he could hear her quiet sobs. "Tenten, I came to apologize." "There's nothing to apologize for. You're being forced to marry someone and have kids. I can understand that. It's clear to me that you don't, Ten-chan. Otherwise you wouldn't be like this." She sat up and turned to face him. "How do you expect me to react, Naruto? Happy that I'm being left out of your life, which other women get to have you and kiss you and hug you? How do you think I feel about this at all?" She shouted at him, fresh tears coming from her eyes. Naruto at that moment felt ashamed of himself. He had been neglecting her lately for training with Tenzo and spending time with Hana and the others. He took off his glasses and looked up at her, making her gasp. His eyes had changed, becoming the deep blue that he had had when he was just a baby. She saw the sadness and regret in them, all contained in the endless depths of sapphire. "Ten-chan, I know that I haven't been spending time with you even when I knew how you felt about me, but I have been training to my limits. I know that isn't much of an excuse, but I need to be strong enough to look after my wives, my future children, as well as Konoha from all of its enemies. I see that it had been more of a negative effect on my life than it should have been, but I want you to know that I do care for you." And she watched as he took out a small seed from his pocket and channeled chakra to it. She watched it grow to become a red rose, one of the most beautiful she had ever seen. "I want to know if you would give me the greatest honor of marrying me." At this point he was down on one knee and holding out the rose. She didn't know how to react. She had been angry and saddened at first, then felt happy he was going to be with people that loved him, and now he was offering to marry her. She reached out her trembling hand and took the rose, crying this time out of happiness and joy. "I do, Naruto-kun." She kissed him, pushing all the joy she felt through her lips into him. When she pulled away she was smiling at him. "No rings." She pouted, making him chuckle. Naruto slid open the door of the room to reveal Guy crying as Shizune hugged him nervously. What's wrong with him?" Shizune smiled at him. "He heard what you said to Tenten and your proposal." Guy sobbed even louder as he stood up straight and then hugged Naruto. "Your youthfulness exceeds my own. I am glad to have a student like you." He bawled as Naruto stood there. Thanks, I guess." Guy released him, wiping the tears from his eyes. "Yosha will find a woman of my own to love and defeat you." He entered the good guy pose. "You do know I'm marrying about 6 women, right?" Guy's smile fell. "You have defeated me." They all stood there staring at him. Naruto left the hospital after speaking to Tsunade and getting a kiss from both her and Tenten. Yugito and Hana would stay overnight, but in different rooms to stop them from attacking each other. He knew he needed to go and see Tamari, but he honestly didn't know where she was. As if the gods heard him, she came round the corner in front of him and walked over to look through a shop window. With a grin he snuck up behind her. She shrieked as she felt a pair of arms circle her waist and warm breath on her ear. "Hello, Tamari-chan." Her eyes fluttered at the tone of his voice and her heart sped up. Hi Naruto-kun. I hope I didn't scare you." She tried to act tough, but her body refused to obey her. "Of course not, I'm made of tougher stuff than the girls here." She smirked. She felt Naruto release her waist and she stumbled slightly. "I believe you, Tamari-chan." She turned to him with her hands on her hips. "Don't get smart with me, mister," she said, poking his chest with her finger. She could see him grin. "Is there something you wanted?" she asked suspiciously. "Is that any way to talk to your husband?" He joked. "We're not married yet, so what do you want?" "Well, I was wondering if you would like to go out later. After all, out of everyone I know you the least and I want to correct that." "And has Gaara and your brother found out yet?" She raised an eyebrow. "They found out about 2 days later, but they returned to Suna with father, so you don't have to worry." "I was not worrying. I wanted to get to know them as well if they're gonna be my brothers. Gaara wouldn't really care about it. Because of Shukaku, I suppose he's a psychopath?" She fidgeted uncomfortably. "Well, I wouldn't call him that, but yeah, sorta." "I see, but anyway, how about tonight? Would you like to go out, or are you busy doing things that a male can't understand?" "Well, I was going to." She realized what he had said and punched him in the chest. "How is washing your hair something males can't understand?" she demanded from him. "Just the fact that it takes you forever to do it." He was punched again. "I want to look pretty, so don't ever question how long it takes. But you look pretty anyway, beautiful if I may be so bold." She blushed slightly and punched him in the face. What was that for?" "I said you're beautiful." "You made me blush." "No one makes me do that." She tried to look angry, but the blush made her look cute instead. "Well, I just did, so you can't really say that anymore, can you?" He chuckled, rubbing his cheek. She glared at him half-heartedly. "Where do you want to do this get-to-know-you session? My place or yours?" He sputtered. "That's right, News travels fast around here, she smirked. Yes, well, I was intending on a more verbal approach, but if you really want to, I guess we could do it in the Hokage's office. No one should be there right now. She blushed furiously as he laughed. He stood beside her and linked arms with her. I'm kidding, Tamari-chan. We'll go get some food and talk over that. She huffed but didn't push him away. Why is it every time we meet you make us go get food? Are you trying to get me fat? No, of course. You're beautiful just the way you are, Tamari-chan. She punched him again and dragged him off on the search for Dango. Naruto had to admit, he was nervous. After all, it's not every day that you go out on a date with the Hokage, your leader, so he had every right to be. His dress shirt and pants were a little uncomfortable compared to his well-worn shinobi clothes, but he was trying to make an effort for this. If people were to see them together, there would be questions about what she was doing with him. He slowly made his way up to the mansion where she was living. It was under the Hokage monument, and he would hesitate to call it a mansion. It seemed so much bigger than that. Endless numbers of windows dotted along it, stretching in each direction from the doorway. He walked up and knocked. The door was immediately flung open to reveal Shizune, who looked a mess with her hair sticking every which way, and she looked flushed. Thank God you're here, Naruto-kun. She grabbed his hand and all but ripped it from him as she dragged him up the stairs and stopped outside a door. This is Tsunade-sama's room. And what am I supposed to do? He asked, rubbing his arm painfully. You need to tell her to put on something more decent. What she tried to wear was outrageous. She shrieked. He looked at her crazily. You do know that she normally has them on show, right? How can it be any worse? She opened the door and Naruto fainted on the spot. Tsunade rounded on Shizune, who had trapped her in her own room. What do you want now, Shiz? She saw Naruto lying on the floor. Is this enough proof that what you are wearing is too indecent? Her apprentice asked heatedly. No, it tells me that he likes my body. She stuck her tongue out at her cheekily. Shizune simply huffed as Naruto groaned and wondered why he was on the floor. He sat up and looked at Tsunade. Now that the initial shock of seeing her had worn off, he was capable of remaining conscious, although the fact that she was in a dress that was horrendously short and all but her breasts were held in the top was enough to make him giggle and fall over backwards, twitching but conscious. See, Tsunade-sama? Is this not enough now? You turned the one non-pervert in the village into a blithering mess who is giggling exactly like Jiraiya. Tsunade couldn't help but scowl at her, although she had to admit he sounded exactly like Jiraiya. She stomped into the bathroom and walked out in a robe that covered her completely. Happy now, Shizune? Depends on if you are wearing something under that. Do you really think I would do that? She said innocently, but the grin on her face said otherwise. I do actually. She got a glare in response. Yes, I am wearing something underneath, mother, she said sarcastically. Shizune went about picking up the giggling Naruto and helped him down the stairs and laid him out on one of the large sofas they had, while Tsunade disappeared back into her bedroom and closed the door. She sighed as she used her medical chakra to try and numb the incessant giggling, but he would heal straight away, and she got steadily more and more furious until she slapped him on the cheek, shocking him out of his stupor. He shot upright, throwing Shizune to the floor as he looked around for Tsunade and instead found Shizune face first on the ground. Hey Shizune-chan, what are you doing down there? She muttered under her breath as he helped her up, and she blushed slightly when she was up flush against him. Saying something about getting some tea, she rushed off into the kitchen. Naruto mused on this as he sat down again and looked about the large spacious living room he was in. He wasn't surprised to see a overly large safe cupboard against the far wall and walked over to inspect it. He lifted up one of the bottles and found it to be empty, and did the same with a few more, finding a similar state with each until he picked up one that was full. Wondering what this was about, he put it back and turned to see Shizune entering the room with a tray and some tea. She saw him standing beside the cabinet and smiled. Tsunade-sama likes her sake, and so I only let her have some every few nights, otherwise she is drunk all the time, she explained, handing him a cup which he sipped from with a small sigh. This is pretty nice tea, Shizune-chan. Did you make it yourself? She blushed and nodded. Yes, I made it because Tsunade-sama needed something to drink when it wasn't sake. Well, it's very good. Could you possibly give me the ingredients? I reckon To-san would love this. She gave him a small nod and they talked simply about their lives, but Naruto encouraged Shizune to talk the most about her training with Tsunade and learn just what she did all the time. He gave a loud bark-like laugh when she told him about running away from the debt collectors that plagued her wherever she went. The story about how she had to transform into one of them and pretend to be chasing her clone as she snuck off with Shizune and Tonton was highly amusing, and he continued to chuckle as her eyes shot to the doorway and saw Tsunade standing there in a simple baggy t-shirt and sweats. Naruto looked up at her. Are we not going out anymore? She shook her head. Shizune wouldn't let me go out in that dress and I don't feel like it anymore. So I wore this shirt for no reason? He whined. She smirked at him. Perhaps not, Naruto-kun, but it might get in the way later on. He raised an eyebrow at her and chuckled again as Shizune looked on curiously. What are you talking about? He looked at her. Well, Shizune-chan, when two people like each other and want to take it to the next level, they normally have sex. Now that involves. She hit him over the head, blushing furiously as Tsunade watched in amusement. They really did act like brother and sister, those two, him being the embarrassing younger brother and her the more sensible older sibling. I know what sex is, Naruto-kun. I am a medic nin. Ah yes, you know what it is, but have you had it is the question. She hit him again. It's not any of your business, that's what. She shrieked at him, huffing. Tsunade cleared her throat. Shizune, if you could stop hitting Naruto-kun, we have plans to keep on schedule. Shizune walked away from him and picked up the empty cups with a quick good night to both of them and left. Tsunade grinned at Naruto and pulled out a box from behind her back and threw it to him. He fumbled with it when he caught it and brought it up to his face to look at it. He raised an eyebrow when he lowered it and saw her smiling with a small blush. So you don't like the books but you watch the movies? He said, showing her the Ichi movie of Jiraiya's books. She huffed. I may not like the books but that doesn't mean the movies aren't much better. I block out the sex, which is most of anyway, and make it funny by muting it and doing stupid voiceovers for each of the characters. He shrugged. I guess that would work. She grinned and took it off of him. She walked over to the wall and lifted a cover on it to reveal a massive TV, and she slid it into the machine with a soft click. She sat down beside him and put her head on his shoulder as the movie began to play. She didn't notice the red eyes staring at the TV and a small grin on his face as he watched. That's the end, guys. If you enjoyed, then make sure to leave a comment. This is Chaos Shinobi signing off.